Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Ashley's life was divided into before and after when she had to make a choice. Her life became a living hell. Her boyfriend Bob was a cool translator working for a big company. They weren't short on money. He graduated from a linguistics school in New York. That's where they met. Ashley loved him more than life and thought he loved her back. It all started with one text when his boss announced a business trip. Ashley wasn't surprised. Bob often traveled to other cities and countries. It was his profession. He couldn't help it. Ashley was completely calm about it. She was sure that he wasn't cheating. He was a very nice guy, had graduated 3 years ago, and was 2 years older than Ashley. He was 27, respectively, and she was 25. They still had their whole lives ahead of them, they thought. How many days are you going away for? Ashley decided to ask. As soon as Bob read the message aloud to her, he fell silent. It meant only one thing. They were going to be separated for a long time. Ashley didn't like it when he was gone for so long. It's hard when the person you love is 1,000 miles away. You can't hug him, you can't kiss him. It's torture. For 6 months, Bob finally admitted. His head bowed in exhaustion. Ashley rushed to pity him, to stroke him. She knew he needed support. He didn't like being away from his beloved for so long. It's been 6 months, Ashley whispered, parsing the word in her head. One word, so much pain in it. Are you angry? He asked, noticing her devastated look. Not at all, the girl lied. She was really angry, but not at him, but at his boss, who was taking her boyfriend away for such a long time. Where are you going? Ashley asked, trying to lighten the mood a little. First Japan, then the US, Czech Republic, Germany. Bob smiled, stroking her cheek. And you have me. Ashley adored the gesture, the show of affection. Bob was so tender at those moments. You've traveled all over the world. Ashley laughed. I'm gonna die of envy here. What am I supposed to do for 6 months? Spend our money? The boy answered jokingly, not our money, yours. I don't have any money of my own. I haven't earned it yet. But I told you that my money is our money. I want you to spend it. I don't have time to use it. I can't do this 6 months without you, Ashley sighed. The last time you left like this was 3 years ago. I almost lost my mind. You won't this year, Bob smiled enigmatically and left the living room. He came back with a big cardboard box. What's this? Ashley looked at him, puzzled. The box was small. It had small round holes in it. I think the girl had already guessed who was in there. Bob bounced around with the box a little more to intrigue Ashley even more, and then he opened it, placing it on the floor. At that moment, a little puppy jumped out of the box and jumped into the girl's arms, licking her face. Ashley washed it all off for a long time afterward, but it was nice that the little dog was so happy to have a new owner. What do you want to name it? Bob asked when Ashley had finally cleaned up the mess the naughty little guy had made. She looked at the puppy carefully. He was playing with a pillow on the couch. She had to come up with a beautiful, but at the same time very unusual name for him. Let it be, Ashley started. Do you want my advice? Bob suddenly interrupted her. Ashley didn't understand his suggestion at first, but then she understood. Bob was a translator. He knew so many languages. Surely there must be something interesting there. Come on, she agreed. I went to Vietnam once and tasted a wonderful soup there. It was so good. I tried to make it at home. Only I didn't have the right ingredients. I gave up on the idea, but I still remember the name of the soup. You. Both of you, Bob laughed. You want to name the puppy Oba? Ashley laughed, because it really sounded like a lot of fun. I like it, so let's call it that. Good, Bob concluded, and glanced at their new friend. I hope he won't let you be sad alone when you're really sad. Give him a hug and then call me. Ashley almost cried at those words. That was so sweet. Bob had tried so hard to make her life bright that he'd given her a puppy. She'd wanted one since she was a little girl. Thank you, she hugged him. I adore you. I love you too, my golden one. The words made her feel warm. Bob often called her golden because he thought her hair was as shiny as gold in the light. Sometimes he called her just gold in endearment. Because of this, he left the very next day. It was very sad to say goodbye to him, but with Ashley now was little Oba. He had learned quickly what was going on, and even seemed to get used to her, though they had known each other only 24 hours. After seeing Bob off, they both came home from the train station. The first thing Ashley did was feed her new friend, and then she made dinner for herself. She sat down to eat on the couch. Bob wasn't really a fan of that because he often dropped his food right on the white plates, which made him angry all the time. With him, she always ate only in the kitchen, but today was a special day, especially since Bob wasn't around right now so she could break that rule. However, fate punished her. As Ashley was moving on to the second leg of chicken, she got sick to her stomach. She had to quickly run to the bathroom, where she emptied her entire stomach. Oba never left her side. Apparently, he was tired of worrying about his mistress. He's right, or he'll die. Who was going to feed him? Ashley didn't understand why the chicken legs had gotten such a reaction. But Ashley threw the chicken away just in case it was expired. She rarely looked at expiration dates. Something made her suspicious, and she didn't like it. She wanted to check, so she ran to the drugstore to get a pregnancy test. So she hoped, sitting on the toilet, "I hope I don't become a mother anytime soon." She was certain that this was all a mistake. Ashley just couldn't become a mother. She didn't think her body was ready for it mentally or physically, and Bob was against it. They weren't thinking about kids at all. Bob was building a career, and she was his companion. That takes strength too. What kids? Ashley blinked for effect, then opened her eyes, looked at the strip, and felt empty. No, it wasn't even an emptiness, but a pain that was getting worse by the second. She kept looking and looking at the two stripes and couldn't understand. Was this someone's ridiculous joke? But then she blinked once, twice. The picture didn't change. "No," Ashley whispered, not even realizing that tears were already forming in her eyes. She wished she had Bob by her side, but what could he do to help? He could only whine. Right now, Ashley wished she could be a dog and howl. She still couldn't believe what was happening out of frustration. She took another test because they were often faulty, but this one showed the same result. In tears, Ashley got up from the bathroom and called Isabella, her closest friend. "I'm in grief," she cried, pacing back and forth across the apartment. Both of them paced with her. What happened? Did Bob have an accident? Panicked friend. Worse, Isabella. "I'm pregnant." Silence. Then the answer. "You should be happy, silly. What are you doing? Soon you'll have someone to live your life for. You said you missed me." Isabella didn't understand. "I'm pregnant," Ashley repeated more insistently. "Bob doesn't want a baby. And neither do I. It's a disaster. I just found out about 10 minutes ago. I'm in shock. I don't know what to do." "Okay, Ashley, the important thing is to stay calm," Isabella tried to reassure her. "There's always the option of an abortion." "An abortion? Isabella, what abortion? I don't even want to hear that word. I won't have a baby." "Well, you don't want kids, like you said, and neither does Bob." "Isabella, I don't need them now. I'd like to be a mother in the future." "Oh God, what am I going to do?" "I suggest you tell Bob he's the father. He needs to know." "No, Isabella, don't you dare say anything about this. It's out of the question. Bob can't know. He's away on a business trip. A very long business trip, 6 months, maybe a year. So, you're going to have a baby without him knowing. I'm obviously not having an abortion. Okay, I need to think about it." Yeah, it wasn't pretty. But Ashley hung up. She needed to think on her own. She was still in shock, so the first thing she did was take a sedative. Where are pregnant women allowed to take them? Somehow that rule hadn't been cared about before. Anyway, after hours of thinking, the girl came to the conclusion that she wouldn't say anything to Bob. Thought she would tell him a little later. He shouldn't have to worry on a business trip. After all, the work is difficult and sometimes even dangerous. If he translated something wrong, those Orientals might send him to execution. That's how she lived all those months. With Bob, they called every night, but she never said a word about the pregnancy. Isabella was told to keep quiet too. No one was to find out before it was too late. Ashley herself had told only Isabella and her grandmother, who had been her birth mother. She, of course, was also against abortion and even agreed to support her if she needed help. But Ashley didn't need any help. She had enough money to live at home. Bob kept Ashley calm. During periods of nervousness, everything went smoothly. 6 whole months went by like that. Bob was supposed to be back any day now, but exactly 24 hours before his flight, he called Ashley and told her that everything was canceled, that he would have to stay another 2 months because there were some complications in Philadelphia. "Come quickly, we're waiting for you," Ashley said, stroking her round belly. Bob was surprised, and the girl immediately realized her mistake. What an idiot. How am I going to get out of this? "Me and the dog," Ashley said quickly, which made Bob laugh. "Yes, both. I miss you even more than I miss you." "You mean just like that, don't you?" Ashley jokingly took offense. "I'm going to leave you, and all I'm going to leave you is a dog." "Okay, I'm kidding," Bob said sweetly. "There's no one more important to me than you know that." When they finished talking, Ashley felt devastated. Bob didn't know anything about her, as if that realization was just now coming to light. Meanwhile, her stomach was getting bigger and bigger. There had to be some way to tell Bob about this, but Ashley was afraid of his reaction. He didn't want kids. True, Isabella had advised her not to delay. The baby's father had to know about everything. The girl kept gathering her thoughts and finding other reasons to call him. She couldn't tell him. She didn't even know what she was afraid of. And so it came to the birth itself. Ashley was accompanied to the hospital by Jody. Her grandmother was there waiting for her. Ashley was so glad that at least one person cared about her. Of course, she wished her mother could have seen the birth of her grandchild, but she had died of a serious illness when Ashley was only 3 years old, and her father had left them even earlier. That's what the girl was told by her grandmother, who took over her upbringing right after her mother's death. "How are you?" Jody asked her granddaughter as she entered the room. She came in just in time, because at that moment Ashley was once again dying of labor and wanted to give birth so that this hell would end. "It's going to be so painful for a long time," Ashley screamed, crying in pain. "Be patient. It's for the baby's sake. He'll be born soon," Jody reassured her. "He's taking his time. The contractions were getting worse. I had to call a doctor." Ashley was about to yell, but the door opened, and someone she hadn't expected to see showed up. Her heart sank into her heels, and the pain of the contractions faded into the background. "Oh, I think I should leave you," Grandma said, and closed the door on the other side. Ashley looked at Bob and couldn't say a word. He saw her in her most defenseless, most vulnerable position. Ashley stood at the bedside in a fit of contraction. "So that's rough," he said, examining her with disdain. Ashley didn't like his mood. "Bob, what are you doing here?" The girl was genuinely surprised. "You're not. I'll be asking the questions here," he continued rudely. That tone made Ashley so scared that she actually stopped talking. "What the hell, Bob?" "Bob, I can explain. It's your baby." "Thank God for that." Bob was outraged. "But it doesn't do you any honor. You hid your pregnancy from me. How could you, Ashley, lie to me so blatantly? Why?" "I was afraid you'd react differently. You didn't want kids. Do you think I'm okay now? Do I have a normal reaction now?" Ashley couldn't answer. The contractions were getting more and more painful. It was getting harder and harder to hold on. It felt like it was impossible to breathe. "You've decided to sign me to you like this," Bob continued sarcastically. Ashley's heart felt like it was bleeding as Bob stabbed her deeper with each word. "I'll tell you what. I'm not an errand boy who's going to put up with this kind of treatment," Bob said. Ashley moaned through the pain, trying to touch her lover. "Don't do this to me. You wouldn't leave me with a baby in my arms. You made a choice first, and it wasn't in my favor." "You can't tie me down like that," Bob said. "Kids and my career aren't compatible right now. So as much as it pains me to say it, we have to break up." He stood there with an indifferent face and said such cruel words, but he kept his cool. It was like he didn't care. Was it really Ashley's fault? "Bob," she began to sob. She couldn't take the contractions any longer, so she pressed the red button by the bed. A nurse came running into the room. When she saw Ashley in this position, she urgently called the midwife. The midwife came to help. "It's time to deliver," the woman said, and nodded to the nurse who escorted her to the portable couch. "Are you the father?" the midwife asked Bob. "No, I'm just in the wrong room," Bob answered emotionlessly and hurried out of the hospital. Those words hurt Ashley to the core. She didn't know what hurt more, being torn apart or having her heart broken. The second option was much worse, and while the doctors thought she was crying to get through the pain of childbirth, she was actually sobbing from the loss of her loved one. She was being torn from the inside out, both physically and mentally. But suddenly the pain stopped. It was very easy, and a little angel was placed on her chest. He screamed and cried, and then it stopped. The beating of its mother's heart must have calmed it down. She liked to think so. Ashley didn't even realize how she woke up in the room. The baby was lying in a cradle next to her bed. In the chair sat the grandmother. She was dozing. Ashley immediately called out to her. As soon as the grandmother opened her eyes, Ashley cried again. She allowed herself to let her real emotions out. After all this time, when she had finally gotten over this hell, the memories of Bob and his words that were killing her from the inside out were still fresh in her mind. Grandma immediately ran over to Ashley and began to hug the poor girl. "Oh, honey, it's okay," she said. "Are you in pain? Should I call the doctor?" Ashley couldn't stop crying. It was like she was speechless from crying. She just wanted to sob until she couldn't stop crying. "Grandma, where's Bob?" Ashley asked hopefully. She wondered if she was imagining things because she was stressed out. Bob was either on a business trip or he was sitting outside the room waiting for her to wake up. "Bob's gone," Grandma said in a heavy voice. "He said he wasn't coming back." This time, Ashley had the strength to ask what had happened. How did he end up here? He was on a business trip and was supposed to be there for another month. "It was me," Jody said in a guilty voice. "I was the one who called him. I was sure he knew about everything. I thought I'd let him know when you went into labor. But as it turned out, he didn't know you were carrying his son, and I didn't want to tell him. But now I realize how stupid that was. What was I hoping for? That he'd come home and see me with a baby and be happy." Naive dreams, Ashley scolded herself. What he did was awful. No, it was my fault. And I didn't tell him when I should have. Now we're reaping the consequences of our own inaction. "Honey, you can't blame yourself," Grandma said, stroking Ashley's head. "It's his fault. His fault alone. I don't know how we're going to raise the baby. We're not going to leave you alone, of course. Well, it's too early to think about that. You rest now. We'll talk afterwards. 3 days passed. Ashley was strong enough to be discharged, so on Wednesday she went home to her old house, where she'd lived until she moved in with Bob. She had to arrange for Isabella to stop by his place and pick up her things. She never wanted to see the man again. She was terribly ashamed of what she had done and would not be able to look him in the eye. He had believed her, and she had done it without telling him. Fool, fool, Ashley thought. Isabella disagreed with her, of course, but Ashley didn't care. She blamed herself, because Bob was perfect for her. She couldn't even allow the idea that he was the bad guy in this story and not her. The stress had made her milk disappear. She had to buy baby formula. Because Ashley couldn't provide her son with good nutrition, she blamed herself even more. Her whole life had turned upside down, and now it was as if the past didn't exist for her, and it was scary. But luckily she had her grandmother by her side. No matter where Ashley was, no matter how hysterical she was, Grandma would come to her grandchild and calm her down. When Ashley couldn't control her feelings, she realized that her child needed a mother, just like she had once done, but she couldn't help it. For the entire first year she'd been on edge, those constant sleepless nights. The stress took a toll on her mental health. Ashley was so exhausted that she was seriously considering how nice it would be to lie in a coffin and do nothing. When she shared these thoughts with Isabella, she was terrified for her friend. "Listen, it's not far to the asylum," she said. "You need help, psychological help." "I don't have time. If you only knew Isabella, I have a 1-year-old child in my arms. But if this keeps going on, are you really going to go mad? And then Liam will lose his mother for sure. Is that what you want?" "No," Ashley cried. "Look, you still have a chance to fix this. I have an extra ticket to a lecture with a very famous psychologist. He's a professor and a Ph.D. He's sure to have something useful to say." Ashley agreed. Not to say she believed in any of this, but she was so buried she was grasping for any lifeline. If this lecture with the psychologist opened her eyes, she'd be glad she did. They came to the lecture in advance, but it was already full. The meeting itself was held in the library, in a separate room, apparently paid for by the psychologist himself. Fortunately, there were still seats, and she and Isabella managed to take 2 tables next to each other. Half an hour later, a stately man with a bald head entered the room. He looked very neat. He smelled generous, calm, and rich. How does it feel to be like that? I guess Ashley will never know, she thought. "Good afternoon, dear guests," the psychologist introduced himself. "My name is Bob." And here those names Bob seemed to haunt Ashley. But would this be the rest of her life? She was already so tired. "I'm sure each and every one of you has come here with your own traumas and problems. But I'm sorry to tell you, this is not a private therapy session," Bob said. The audience laughed, but Ashley wasn't amused. She had high hopes for this man. If he didn't help her, no one else would, and the psychologist didn't even realize that he had such a responsible mission, to convince Ashley that life had meaning. Bob began his lecture with slides on objective relationships. Apparently, that would be his main topic. Ashley realized she was getting nowhere here and wanted to get up to leave. Isabella grabbed her hand, and Ashley fell back onto the table. "Sit up for me," Isabella said in a whisper. Ashley nodded silently. She didn't want to upset her friend. Isabella wanted to help after all. Ashley ended up staying and began to listen about their relationship. For the first half hour, she didn't understand what she was doing here. But then she started to look into it and found some similarities between what the counselor was saying and her relationship with Bob. "He won't let you work. You're totally dependent on him. Affects your self-esteem," Bob was saying. These talking points swirled around in her head and soon came together into a coherent puzzle. Of course, Bob is a tyrant, Ashley realized. And that was the feeling Ashley had come here for. Her eyes finally opened. She felt so relieved and free. It had been a long time since she had felt anything like this. I think she even stopped blaming herself for her and Bob's breakup. The lecture lasted only 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity, and Ashley loved that eternity. She was falling in love with this psychoanalysis more and more. And then Bob finished his lecture. He was immediately mobbed by a crowd of female fans asking for autographs and questions. Ashley had something she wanted to ask him, but Isabella was so tired that they didn't wait in that huge line to see the psychologist and just left on their way home. It seemed to Ashley that Isabella didn't even want to come here. It felt so warm. Did she really just come here for a friend? Ashley thought. Where did Bob go to school and where does he work? Ashley asked. She was curious, so she decided to find out all about his life. Since her friend had brought her to his lecture, she knew something about his personality. Well, he was a psychologist, of course. Isabella laughed. And now he works at some fancy university in New York. Why are you so interested in that? Ashley left that question unanswered because she didn't know why she was so interested. But one thing she could say for sure was that she was very attracted to psychology. Ever since then, she'd been a huge fan of Bob's, an important one. Attended every single one of his lectures, went to various events he organized, and none of it went unrewarded. A month later, Ashley was certain she wanted to go to university. "What's that?" Her grandmother was surprised at her enthusiasm. "Isn't it too late for you to go to university?" "It's never too late," Ashley quoted a famous phrase, and that's a good thing, of course. The pursuit of knowledge is commendable. "Well, let's do something about it. Honey, remember, you're having a baby." Those words brought Ashley back down to earth. And she didn't fall to the hay, she fell to the asphalt. It was very painful and disgusted with herself. For once, she decided to think about herself. But who would think of her son in that case? She didn't want to be a bad mother to him. No one in his family would ever lose their mother again. Liam should be happy and well provided for. "Well, university studies can be postponed," the girl said, bowing her head. The grandmother seemed to realize that her granddaughter was not very happy about this outcome and said, "So there is no need to grieve. You live in the XC century. Not in the Middle Ages. You have to take a year to prepare for college to get in. You have no idea what a huge competition there is now. I asked my neighbor. Her daughter's going this year. And in a year, Liam will be old enough to go to kindergarten. You'll have the whole day free." Grandma saved the day. Ashley screamed with joy and threw herself into her arms. "Hush, hush," she laughed. "Are you going to wake Liam?" As planned, Ashley spent the whole year studying for her psychology exams. She had to pass biology, social studies, and any foreign language. She didn't have money for tutors, so she tried to do everything on her own. She had a good base in English at school, and her grandmother's neighbor taught biology at the local university. Ashley didn't need to study social studies because she understood it all the way through. In a year, she had gotten her biology up to a good level and was confident enough to take the exams. Ashley hadn't realized that waiting for the results would be so exciting. She was saved by both Liam, who was growing by leaps and bounds. He could already talk to her, but in his own way. To an outsider, it was often a meaningless set of phrases and words. However, he had learned well how to cry at the right moment to get his mother's attention. This was especially true when it came to food. When he couldn't get enough, he would bang on the table and throw a tantrum. Ashley would run up to him and give him another bite. "He's funny." The results were even better than Ashley expected, and she applied to college. Not to LA, of course, but the university was as good as L.A. In August, she was accepted, and she was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. At the end of the summer, she could take care of her son without the interruption of endless cramming, and she was beginning to like life. Yes, it was hard, but like everyone else, Ashley was beginning to get a taste for it. Toward the end of August, she started looking for a job. She realized that her grandmother's pension wouldn't be enough to feed her and Liam, whose needs were growing every year. She had to think about where to go to work. They didn't hire many people without an education. You needed a degree. But here in one company, she was accepted for a position, if it could be called a position. It is unlikely that a cleaner can have any career growth. But the company paid well, and there were only IT people working there. And Ashley didn't even want to go into details. The main thing was that it paid well for just a few hours of work. "So, would you like to work for us?" the girl at the interview asked her in a nasty voice. There was no reason to interview for such a position. To scrub floors, you had to know different cleaning methods and patterns. Yes, Ashley smiled, confident that she would be accepted. "Do you have any accomplishments?" Ashley involuntarily let out a chuckle. "But why any accomplishments?" "To scrub floors. I'm sorry. I said something funny." The girl was indignant. "No, I'm sorry. I just didn't expect to be asked that. It's still a job that doesn't require education. Doesn't require. But you have to pass the interview, right? I take it you don't have any accomplishments. School Olympics would be okay." No." That bitch gave Ashley a scornful look. When is this hell gonna end? It was so stuffy in that office it was unbreathable. Ashley felt like she was in space without a spacesuit. The girl studied her documents for a very long time, as if she was pretending that someone else was applying for the position. But fortunately, there was no one sitting in the corridor. People value themselves, so they don't take dirty work. But for how long that girl was playing a one-actress show, it's like there's a lot of candidates with 2 college degrees sitting outside the door. "Okay, you're a good fit," she finally concluded. Ashley was overjoyed. I wanted to jump right in the office. But Ashley tried to keep her composure until she left the building. You can start work tomorrow at 1800 hours. We'll see you there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley thanked her. And the employee was shocked at the hypocrisy, as it seemed to her. Goodbye, she said coldly and disappeared from Ashley's sight. The day was filled with rainbow colors. On the way home, Ashley even bought an ice cream that melted in minutes. She was about to pick up her son from the nursery, and he would be going to kindergarten in September. How quickly time flew by. What are you serious about becoming a psychologist? Isabella asked, sitting at Ashley's house. Grandma and Liam were asleep, and the friends were talking quietly in the kitchen, whispering, you might say. And it was my experience that psychologists really do help people. Now I want to do the same. They make good money, too, Isabella winked. You'll make more money than your ex. By the way, one thing Ashley had forgotten was that at the mention of Bob's name, her heart kept clenching, but it didn't hurt so much anymore. The wounds were healing and turning into barely visible scars. He made his choice, Ashley said distantly, to leave us. Let him live his lonely life. I didn't know if I should tell you, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I think he has a new girlfriend, Isabella said. Doesn't she look like you at all? Is she a model? Ashley laughed, remembering how Bob had always wanted to change everything about her to make her bow like a magazine model. Ashley had thought he loved her, and that was why he wanted to fix her appearance. Turns out he just wanted to pacify her with a pretty cover. No, not attracted to her at all. Well, that depends on how you look at it. Of course, her lips are so pouty I thought she was a duck, Isabella has grinned. I'm sure there's a lot of money in those lips. His money. And those bright, long nails that could reach to the moon. All in all, a regular dummy. I don't envy your Bob. Money, you were always smart. He's the one who kept you from studying and earning. He knew you'd get smart and realize he was a jerk. And that's what really happened. I'm glad you left him. He left me, Ashley corrected. And not just me. Those words didn't hurt her so much anymore, but a fact is a fact. You think you left him the moment you decided not to talk about the baby. He was already using you. Ashley nodded. But it was better to think that way. It was nice to know that it was all behind her. She was living a happy life now, albeit at her grandmother's house for now. But she knew there was more to come. She had a beautiful son who would grow up to be a good man without a father, and who said that was where her love adventures would end. Ashley was still young enough to fall in love again. Unlucky the first time, lucky the next. Love is complicated. But who said life was simple? It's complicated. Because if it were simple, it would be very boring, and people don't like that. After this private conversation with Isabella, Ashley's self-esteem increased dramatically. She became even more confident in her decision to become a psychologist and change her life. She wanted to come home at some point and tell her grandmother, "We're moving to the seaside where you've always dreamed of going." Ashley did everything for this goal, for her beloved grandmother who never left her side, and for her son who needed her care. At work, Ashley was told of her duties to clean the conference rooms and offices every day, wash the windows once a week, and water the flowers. There weren't that many duties really. Ashley decided to take weekend shifts so that she could work during the day. The pay was better. Unfortunately, she was unlucky with her co-workers. Who knew there were such nasty girls working at this company? She should have known that from the look on the face of the girl who hired her as a cleaner. Ashley was the only one here. The other young girls worked as secretaries and managers. They very often passed her in the hallway, and going around the corner, laughed without hiding it. Well, everyone has their own complexes, Ashley thought. Maybe their parents made them scrub the floors at home, and now they could laugh at people like me. Psychology was saving her, after all. It had opened her eyes to a lot of things. People didn't seem so cruel to her now. She knew that everyone has their own traumas and complexes, with which not everyone fights, because they do not realize it. So they take out their anger, resentment, and lack of love on others. One day in October, however, a situation happened to her that Ashley still recalled with irritation. One Saturday afternoon, she was cleaning the hallway outside one of the conference rooms. This company was quite wealthy, so the floors here were marble. She had to scrub them several times so they wouldn't get streaks. They were supposed to sparkle and shine like mirrors. Except that Rebecca, who kept holding her back, decided she knew how to do a better job. "And what are these divorces?" she asked indifferently, pointing to the floor. "Did you just get hired here for no reason?" "In case you didn't know, this floor needs to be mopped several times," Ashley pointed out, "and with 1 million people walking on it, that's hard to do." You've got a lot of nerve. In a job like this, you're supposed to keep your mouth shut. Why would I do that? If I wash floors, I'm not a person, Rebecca said. She didn't say anything. She realized she'd said something stupid, but she really wanted to get hurt, so she did something awful. Ashley still hoped Rebecca was the least bit ashamed of it. Rebecca walked over to Ashley's bucket and kicked it and knocked it over. All the dirty water spilled over the floor. What the hell? Ashley shouted angrily, getting to her feet. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so clumsy, Rebecca laughed and ran off. And Ashley had to scrub the floor for the rest of her shift. She could have finished much sooner if it hadn't been for that bitch. She thought that nasty girls like her would grow up to be nice and understanding, but she was wrong. Very many people never change at all. Oh, that's it. So either you're going to Hawaii with me, or I'm leaving you, Hannah dictated her terms to Morgan. The man didn't know what to do. She made him terribly angry, and out of emotion he blurted out, Jesus, run away. Who needs you like this? I won't give you a dime for a vacation. The only one, go find yourself another idiot, here I go, shouted Hannah, throwing things into the suitcase. I need him, you moron. Yeah, curse me with those words all you want. But if you get out of my house, I'm running away with my heels blazing. I don't want such a husband. One-word man, and you act like a donkey. I'm the one acting like a jackass? You ruined my meeting. Goodbye, you rude bastard. Hannah threw her suitcase out the door and slammed it shut. It wasn't until Morgan sat down on the couch with a headache that he realized what he'd lost. And he got a message on his phone from his manager. He had to show up for a meeting with the Japanese tonight. And he had to have a companion. Showing up without her was like showing up naked and without ID. It was a real disaster. Morgan didn't know what to do with himself. Hannah had gotten Hannah to freak out today, on the eve of such an important negotiation. Disaster. In a panic, Morgan ran out of the house and got into the car and ordered the driver to leave. The man tried to figure out how he could get out of it. When he got out of the car right outside the office, some girl of easy behavior was sitting there, and Morgan even had a thought, maybe take her for the evening. But when he got closer, she smelled like she'd bathed in cow dung. No, it was impossible to find a decent companion a few hours before such an important event. Morgan bit his nails, wondering what to do. It was a bad habit of his. It made his manicure look very ugly. He tried to hide his hands. Often he wore an expensive watch, not to show off, but it was the watch that attracted attention, not the nails. Morgan went up to the second floor, stepped out of the elevator, and stopped. Thoughts were already creeping into his head that he would have to cancel an important meeting. He couldn't go without the girl. Mr. Whitten. Hello, Morgan, Rebecca said in a gentle voice. Morgan stared at her. She was pretty. She had a great figure. She had everything where it needed to be, but something about her was repulsive. That's right, she was too stupid. Even Hannah had more brains than that chicken. And he'd hired Rebecca because she was on time for work and served tea well. Hot, just the way he liked it. As it turned out, very few girls could handle such simple duties. Everyone was a type. Morgan had already walked up to his office and saw a huge puddle of dirty water right in front of the door. What the hell is this mess? He cursed sharply and looked around. Excuse me, shouted a girl from across the hall. I couldn't handle the bucket. Ashley was running toward him with the clean water she'd just now changed. Sorry again, she said, cleaning up that puddle right under his feet. Get up, Morgan ordered her. Who are you? I beg your pardon. Everyone. I apologize, Ashley said. I'm a janitor. There was an accident. I accidentally spilled a bucket of dirty water, but I promise this place will be sparkling in 10 minutes. But Morgan didn't care about the puddle right now. He was looking at Ashley, and he was fascinated by the features he noticed first, her straight nose, her cheekbones, and most importantly, her naturalness. Who are you again? He asked, pressing the girl. I don't need your title, just your name. Ashley, the girl, introduced herself confused. I work here as a janitor, and you must be here to see our director. I was told he wasn't here. Maybe you're waiting for him in the lobby. I don't have to wait for anyone, Morgan said sternly. Take that rag off your head. Ashley obeyed and pulled off the headscarf that hid her thick, dark hair. It's just right, exclaimed the man. So, Ashley, consider yourself promoted. Now I'll give you my card, and you'll have to run to the nearest boutique and buy yourself a dress for tonight. Yes, so you won't be embarrassed in front of our foreign guests. After you get your manicure, makeup, and hair done, you'll follow me at 6 o'clock. Ashley nodded silently, as if in anabasis, taking the card the man held out to her. She even dropped the mop out of fright. Morgan took another look at her from head to toe. and then walked into the office. God, what was she thinking agreeing to this? Ashley couldn't even say anything back because she had a wife at home. She had a grandmother to help. And now this. The man seemed so serious and majestic that she couldn't refuse him. And now it was too late to refuse, so she had to follow his instructions. Ashley didn't even know where they were going, or why, or if she would go alone. She was getting scared to the point of trembling. But she decided to try for fear of being fired if she didn't fulfill the client's request. And this was definitely an important client. It was not for nothing that he went through his office and waited for the director even at such an unfortunate moment when she was changing the water. Today was definitely not her day. "Excuse me, how much can I spend?" Ashley asked Linda, walking back down the hall. A stern-looking man was sitting on the couch in front of the principal's office, texting with someone, frowning. He gave the girl a disdainful look, and then gave her a haughty and cold look. "I don't care if it's $1 million. There's no limit. There are PIN codes for small purchases too. The main thing is to do it before 18:00. Meet me in front of this building at 6:00 sharp, and don't you dare be late." Ashley immediately closed the door and hurried downstairs to find the boutiques. As she ran out of the office, she was caught by a tall man in a suit and black glasses. "Morgan ordered me to escort you," he said sternly. "I'm sorry, who?" Ashley wondered. "The principal," he rolled his eyes. "Or aren't you Ashley?" "Ashley," she said uncertainly, already doubting her own name. So it was the principal. Ashley was stunned. Now it was twice as scary. "I've already found some good clothing boutiques nearby. Let's go," the man said in a bass voice and led her to a shiny black Mercedes. From the car, Ashley called her grandmother and told her that she would be late for work and went to the boutique to look for a dress for some important evening. On the way, the driver and part-time director's bodyguard explained everything to her. Morgan was supposed to discuss a deal with foreigners at a meeting today, and his companions had disappeared. They had to find a replacement. Ashley was it. In a way, she felt good about it. She was the chosen one. She was rarely noticed, and here she was involved in such a story in the center of events. At the boutique, Ashley was immediately surrounded by two pushy consultants who tried to sell her a discounted dress. They were probably just oriented by her appearance, which was certainly awful after such a hard shift. She had, of course, rejected all those discounted dresses. They were just ridiculous. When she lived with Bob, money had been plentiful, so she had taste. Ashley had picked out a few dresses that accentuated her figure perfectly. She wasn't particularly shapely, but she wasn't skinny either. She was a normal girl of slim build, and tight dresses looked great on her. She decided on a classic black dress, matching her shoes and accessories. When Ashley came out to Morgan's driver, he nervously pointed out the time. It turned out she'd spent an hour and a half in the boutique, actually only 15 minutes. They immediately drove on to the beauty salon where Ashley had a hot bath and a massage and manicure. How long had she dreamed of all this? Already she had forgotten what it felt like to feel like a well-groomed woman. After all the treatments, she was immediately started on her hair and makeup. She asked for something subtle, but not boring. It was going to be an evening after all. In general, she needed to look modest but tasteful. Ashley came out of the salon in a black dress, ready to go. The driver took her back to the office, but she stayed in the car, because a few minutes later Morgan called the driver and told him he was going alone. He would be waiting for her outside the restaurant. It was a little uncomfortable driving to a strange place to a strange man. But Ashley had traveled so far that day that going to the restaurant was nothing to her. Morgan was indeed waiting for Ashley outside the restaurant with a bouquet of flowers. The restaurant itself was one story and almost all glass, but it certainly looked rich, to say the least. The gold chandeliers, floors, and mirrors were the most appropriate for this Morgan, and it was all decorated very pompously. Ashley had never been in such places before. She had to go to restaurants sometimes, of course, but Bob rarely invited her. They were ushered into a private room where there was a large round table for 7. Morgan kindly seated Ashley at the table and sat down next to her. They waited for his fellow foreigners. Somehow they were running late. "Are you nervous?" the principal suddenly asked. In fact, Ashley was terribly nervous. Her hands were shaking. She promised herself she'd behave herself. This would never happen again in her life. In fact, sitting next to Morgan, she didn't feel as scared as she had felt before. Once she saw him now, he didn't seem like a principal anymore. They were almost the same age, but because of his gruff tone in the office, Ashley was actually afraid of him. After all, there was no way to answer anything later. Luckily, they didn't know each other that much so he could be nice to her, but he had been very cold to her in the office, which of course had affected her attitude toward him. "Not at all," Ashley lied. "You look very spectacular," the man said honestly, looking at the girl. Admittedly, she rarely received such glances from the opposite sex now. Ashley dressed modestly and painted in such a way that her beauty was hidden from the eyes of others. It was a good idea to get herself in order once, and then she could claim to be a rich man's girlfriend. She liked that kind of attention. She felt more confident when men complimented her. "Not a waste of money," Ashley joked. "The important thing is that I got it done by 6 in the morning. I have to admit, I expected worse," Morgan said. "But listen, don't wear that headscarf again, please. It doesn't look good on you. Your hair is very beautiful and thick. But it's uncomfortable to work with your head uncovered," said Ashley. "Then I'll put you in another position where you can feel more free and not have to wear such ridiculous and horrible outfits." It was a very ordinary janitor's outfit. Ashley smiled. "I am a cleaning lady." "You don't use that word around here again," Morgan said. "I don't want you to be a secretary," Ashley suddenly said firmly. The last thing she wanted was to be a dumbass secretary who brought coffee and answered phones for clients. It was a horrible job. She'd rather work as a janitor for the rest of her life than that. Morgan looked at her in surprise, but didn't have time to say anything. 3 Japanese men, accompanied by an interpreter, entered the room. Ashley realized he was wearing glasses, but when they sat down at the table and the man took off his glasses, the girl almost had a heart attack. In front of her sat Bob himself, and apparently he didn't recognize her at first, and neither did she recognize him. His eyes only widened when Morgan introduced Ashley. "This is Ashley, my girlfriend," the principal said, shaking the girl's hand with everyone. Immediately, Ashley's cheeks flushed. She didn't think she would be playing the role of her boss's girlfriend. Bob looked at her with bewilderment and some new expression in his eyes that she didn't understand. Ashley tried not to look at him at all to avoid the awkwardness. Suddenly, the memories came flooding back to her. She wanted to burst into tears at the table, but she held back. She'd promised herself she'd hold it together, no matter what happened. Did it hurt? Very much. But in that moment, she felt like a soldier. She couldn't let Morgan down. He was counting on her. All in all, the meeting went more or less normally. Morgan was very actively discussing something with his foreign partners, and Bob was translating it. To give him credit, he was doing a good job. Bob kept glancing at Ashley throughout the evening, but he didn't seem to know her any better than anyone else in the room. Probably didn't want to get into it right here. He probably had a lot of questions. Ashley didn't have any at all. He was a translator, and he was still a translator, and his personal life was of no interest to the girl. Not anymore. "So well, it's time to call it a night," Morgan summarized. He got up from the table and shook hands with all 4 of them, including Bob. "It was a pleasure to meet you. I hope to see you among our partners." The Japanese bowed to him as a courtesy and left. As soon as the last person left that VIP lounge, Ashley ran to the restroom. There was no more strength to hold back the tears. Memories came over her in such a way that she could no longer resist. She wanted to sob again because of what Bob had done to her, and more importantly, for what? For giving him a son. Ashley was sitting in a stall when she heard the restroom door ajar. "Ashley, are you in here?" a familiar voice asked. She remained silent, but Morgan kept up with her. "Answer it, please." Ashley couldn't lie to him, and she couldn't keep quiet any longer, so she responded. "You're not doing well, are you? Was there something wrong with the food?" he asked cautiously. Ashley panicked. He must have thought she was poisoned. It couldn't be worse. She couldn't take the embarrassment. "No, I just felt sick," she tried to get out of it. "Did I say something wrong?" No, it's just stress. I'm sorry, I don't go to these things very often." There was a chuckle from outside the door. "Yeah, it's really an unusual day. It's also the first time I've ever invited a stranger to such an important meeting. Then let's get this over with. Go to your girlfriend, she's probably waiting for you," Ashley hinted. "We broke up. I'm not going to put up with any more of her behavior," Morgan said. "Look, I don't really like talking to the door. Why don't you get out?" Ashley felt a little uncomfortable too. It was the first time she'd ever talked to a man in a bathroom stall. It even made it a little funny. She wiped away her tears, stood up, collected her thoughts, and opened the door. A confused Morgan was looking at her. She never thought she would see him in such an odd position. He seemed very stiff in the office, but here he was so vulnerable and confused that she wanted to hug him and feel sorry for him like a destitute kitten. He looked at Ashley like he wanted to memorize her with his gaze. "Have you been crying?" he asked worriedly, as if he really cared. "I told you I was just worried," Ashley tried to smile. "You've got," He didn't finish, but touched the corner of her lips with his fingers. "May I?" Ashley nodded. She must be so sloppy, she thought, that she didn't even know how to use a napkin to remove food from her lips. He ran his fingers gently over the right corner of her lips and waved a circle. "That's it," he smiled victoriously at that second. The lighting fell on his eyes. They were blue like the ocean or the abyss. It was so scary to look into them. What if you drowned? But Ashley couldn't look away from them. In a moment, however, the fairy tale was gone when he straightened his back and his eyes became night again. Only then did the girl wake up. "I have to go," Ashley said, trying to gently pull him away so she could walk toward the exit. Can't we stay a little longer?" he asked with hope in his voice. "I need to feed my baby," she answered honestly, and got a surprised look. What did he expect? They didn't know each other, and this whole performance was just to save his reputation. Ashley still didn't understand why she was wasting her time with a stranger. She had thought he was their client at first, and then she realized he was the boss, or she would have fired him. Anyway, she ran away like a rat from a sinking ship, and she wasn't ashamed. She didn't have to continue the evening with her boss. She'd done her duty. That was enough. All the way back, Ashley cried, unable to control her feelings again. And the worst part was that she didn't even realize why she was sad. Did she really want to go back so badly? The answer came the next morning, around 9:00, when everyone was asleep and Ashley was getting ready for work. There was a knock on the door. What kind of idiot would knock when there was a bell for that? I wanted to chase this madman off the doorstep and get on with my business. But when Ashley opened the door, her body went stiff. The first thing she saw was a huge bouquet of flowers, and behind him stood Bob. "What are you doing here?" Ashley asked sternly, trying to muffle her feelings and slow the rhythm of her beating heart. "Hi," Bob said naively, childishly. "I was just passing by and thought I'd stop by." He handed the girl the bouquet of flowers she didn't need. Ashley placed it on the floor next to her, showing how she felt about this man. "I thought at first you were living with that man," Bob continued. "What man?" Ashley didn't understand. "Morgan. I thought you were his girlfriend. But then I did some checking and realized that you were living with your grandmother now. I already knew the address. I'm glad you decided to try your hand at detective work, and you did, but I don't really care how you found me." All Ashley felt now was hatred for the man. She realized that there was no room left in her heart for love for this lowlife. She looked into his eyes and wanted to burn him with her gaze. Morgan's eyes seemed so much more attractive and deeper to her than those lifeless gray crystals. "So why did you come?" Ashley forced herself to ask, because Bob just stood there, silent. "Ashley," he said softly, almost in a whisper. She used to like the way he said her name, but today she wanted to shut him up. "I want to renew our relationship." The suggestion made her laugh for some reason, and he wouldn't ask for her wish. Why should he? Ashley laughed haughtily. It was a stupid thing to do back then. "I still love you, Ashley. Please come back to me. Our son shouldn't have to grow up without a father." And he found out about his son. Who told him all this? Did they write her biography on the internet and leak all her information down to her address? Ashley thought. "I don't want to see you," Ashley said angrily, through gritted teeth, emphasizing each word so that the jerk would remember them forever. "Ashley, you know what it's like to grow up without a father." Bob began to manipulate her. But Ashley had known all these tricks for a long time. She'd just been manipulated at the university. She wouldn't fall for it. "It's all lies. Get out," Ashley snapped at him. The girl just slammed the door in his face. He'd lost his way. Now she was standing by the door, waiting for him to leave, peeking through the peephole. Bob staggered for a moment. Then he realized he was out of luck and took the elevator downstairs. And Ashley suddenly felt so sick. Her head ached and tears sprang from her eyes. She slid down under the door and collapsed to the floor. It seemed she had never been in so much pain before, and she thought those wounds had healed long ago. Ashley heard a rustle in one of the rooms. Her grandmother was awake too. Ashley immediately got to her feet and pretended that nothing had happened. "Why are you standing at the door?" Grandma asked. Then she turned her gaze to the flowers Ashley had forgotten to hide. "Are they from your boyfriend?" she asked, smiling slyly. What boyfriend, she wondered. Did she really hear everything? "Well, who did you go out with yesterday?" "I know that you were not at work late," said the grandmother. Everything became obvious at once. "Well, tell me, who's chasing you?" "Trying to save the situation and hide the information about Bob's arrival," Ashley said. "My boss asked me out." Grandma leaned against the wall. So shocked was she by the news. You're going out with him tonight, she hoped. Ashley was starting to get annoyed by these questions. It was like she was 16 to report back. No, of course not. I turned him down, Ashley said immediately. It's not right for me, a cleaning lady, to date my boss. Oh, you fool, Granny exhaled disappointedly. Of course, she thought about a second date, or rather, she'd had meetings, of course. She'd even had dreams about Morgan. And now, after Bob's arrival, those thoughts were starting to turn into realized desires. God forbid meeting Morgan at this rate will turn into obsessive dreams, Ashley thought. Glancing at her watch, she hurried to work. Ashley had never been late, so she didn't want to be late this time. She got to the office on time and was immediately confronted by Rebecca, who looked at her as if Ashley had turned into a smelly, dirty rat. I don't know how you got Morgan down, but he's waiting for you in his office tonight, Rebecca said with disgust in her voice. Ashley just nodded. She didn't want to continue this disgusting conversation. As she was walking toward her office, Rebecca called out to her. You be careful with him. If you do anything wrong, you'll get fired, she shouted angrily, giggling. How annoying such vulgar and low things were, Ashley thought. She knocked on the office door and immediately heard the goodness to enter. Hello, Morgan. You paged, the girl asked in a perfectly normal voice. Why should she be afraid? She's just a janitor. He's not going to fire her after that bathroom tantrum last night. Hi, Ashley. The man smiled. Have a seat. He reached for the carafe and offered Ashley some water. Ashley politely declined. What else is there to drink in the principal's office? Even if it's just water, what if I spill it and embarrass myself? No way. All right, Morgan said. In that case, I'll get right to the point. You were very helpful yesterday, and I'd like to thank you. I don't need money, Ashley said immediately, sure that was what he meant. Morgan looked at her with surprise and even a twinge of indignation. Ashley seemed to have made a mistake in her judgment. No, he protested immediately, no money. I just wanted to give you a promotion. Yeah, that sounded more pleasant. Ashley didn't care what he did, as long as it paid a salary. And if there was an opportunity for a raise, it's a no-brainer. I asked my team to do a little research on you. Turns out you're such a secretive person. I didn't find out much about you, Morgan laughed. Why would a janitor tell you anything about herself? As long as she does her job well. That's enough, Ashley countered. Yes, the boss continued to smile. Anyway, I'd like to offer you the position of my assistant. Assistant? Ashley asked in bewilderment. It was a position she'd never encountered before. Yes, let's call it that. The boss nodded. You could accompany me to all my meetings, take care of some small things for me, make arrangements with people. I used to do it myself, but as you know, our company is expanding, and I need an assistant. The offer sounded great. Ashley would love to do it, but it would take up so much time. No one to take care of her son. No, it wasn't the right position for her. I regret to say no, Ashley said clearly and courteously. I don't have the time to do all this. Why not? Morgan wondered. He seemed to have forgotten what the girl had told him yesterday. He must have thought she was an unmarried student just looking for a chance to meet someone. I have a baby? Ashley said. It sounded pathetic, she said, ashamed, but it couldn't be helped. Morgan stared at her in silence for a long moment, and then he said, If you work the same amount of hours in the same days, will you do it? That sounded tempting. If she got a raise, kept the same hours, and worked in a more interesting position, it's a miracle. Should I think about it? Ashley replied. She didn't want to say yes right away. She needed to discuss it with her grandmother, weigh the pros and cons. Yes, Morgan said, a little resentfully. If it were Ashley, she'd be offended too. He'd be offended too. Ashley would be too if he were Ashley. But I don't think it'll last. There's a lot of people applying for this job right now. I've got plenty of good candidates I could consider. Now she's feeling a little hurt. Had the spark that had flown between them yesterday been just her fantasy? Had he done it just to thank her for her help yesterday? In fact, that was probably the case. Ashley just couldn't get enough male attention, so she made up the idea that absolutely everyone needed it. And the situation with Bob this morning had given her a lot of confidence. She really hoped that someone needed her, that finally it wasn't her running around after someone, but everyone after her. Okay, I'll answer it tonight, Ashley said frustratedly, and was getting up to leave when Morgan grabbed her wrist. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Please leave me alone. Ashley didn't understand what he wanted. Well, honored your request. Maybe you need some support right now. But you don't want to work with me, or do you really need to think about it? He asked quite seriously. I really need to think about it. I have to discuss it with my family. Oh, I see, Morgan answered frustratedly. Apparently he was not satisfied with this answer, but he could think of no other question to get to the point. Well, am I going to go? The girl asked with a smile. Yes. Of course, Morgan lifted the corners of his lips. Ashley was already heading for the exit when he called out to her again. Ashley. He corrected himself. Excuse me, can I walk with you after my shift, unless you're in a hurry? That amused Ashley. It felt like Morgan was trying to latch onto something to walk with her. It made her feel good somehow. Maybe she hadn't gotten herself anything after all. I can walk a little, Ashley agreed. Morgan's eyes lit up. Then I'll meet you in my office today. As soon as your shift is over, he replied formally, but with a smile of satisfaction. Ashley walked out the door and pressed herself against the wall. Her heart was pounding frantically. Was she really experiencing those trembling feelings again? She hadn't felt this way since her breakup with Bob, and now she longed to see Morgan more than anything in the world. Rebecca didn't see Ashley again that day, so she finished work at 6:00 p.m. As Ashley reached for the mop, she glanced at herself in the mirror. No, you can't go out like that. She'd looked much better yesterday. What if the whole thing evaporated and the carriage turned into a pumpkin? I couldn't let that happen. I had to dial Isabella's number. Girl, help me out. I told her everything that had happened in the last 2 days. Isabella rushed to rescue her friend from the situation and immediately arrived at the office 15 minutes later and handed Ashley some clothes. Ashley changed right in the restroom. This day's dress was a soft pink cocktail dress. Morgan was going to love it. Where do you think you're going with that outfit? Rebecca laughed, looking over at Ashley as she walked toward Morgan's office. What, did Morgan find a new one already? No, Ashley tolerated it, but she couldn't take the insults anymore. Rebecca had lost all sense of shame. Why don't you look at yourself first? Ashley smiled. She hadn't done that for herself, had her buttocks and breasts pumped up. Rebecca was angry, which made the wrinkles on her face more visible. You got a lot of attitude, you little mongrel. I may be a mongrel, but I can rise to any position I want, and you can sit here all your life, serving tea. How dare you? Get out of here. I'll share. The door opened and Morgan came out of the office. He was wearing a different suit today, but he still looked amazing. Rebecca, he saw his secretary, I'm so glad you stopped by to mop my office. What but? That's Ashley's job, isn't it? Rebecca was outraged. I fired her today, Morgan smiled and led Ashley to the elevator. She'd never felt such a good feeling of victory before. They'd had a great time that night, and Ashley had decided to move on to a new position as his assistant. But their relationship wasn't just about work. Morgan started asking her out more and more often, courting her. His first coolest act, which Ashley will never forget, was when he gave her son a radio-controlled racing car. That toy was still a little out of age for him, but within a year, Liam was playing with it full-time. At the same time, about a year later, Morgan proposed to Ashley. It was so beautiful that she still remembered that day as one of the happiest of her life. He then proposed to take the whole family on vacation. Liam's grandmother and even the dog went with them, as a reminder of her past unhappy love. And so, on the shore of a private beach under the cover of night, when the moon was the size of an entire saucer and shone like 1,000 stars, he got down on one knee and asked for her hand in marriage. Well, of course, she said yes. After such a marvelous marriage proposal, how could one refuse? They were married exactly 1 month later. Ashley had told him about her desire to move to the sea. He'd been hesitant at first. After all, his business was in the city. But later he came to the conclusion that he could manage the company remotely. That's how Ashley ended up at the sea. Her grandmother was also happy to spend the last years of her life on a sandy beach. And how did you know I was the one? Ashley asked, as the two of them sat by the sea, throwing pebbles and shells at it. I just saw it, Morgan laughed. You didn't like my headscarf. I made it myself, by the way. Let's be honest, it really didn't suit you. This whole job didn't suit you. You're much better suited to be a psychologist. You're just made for it. He was right. Ashley was really passionate about it. She loved helping people, explaining to them how to deal with stress and problems. It inspired her. After all, she could make this world a much better place, a world without violence and grief. So Ashley's life was once again divided into before and after when she had to make a choice. Her life was now a paradise. Amber considered herself as much a part of these places as the dry air that smelled of wormwood, or the huge stones that broke through from the walls of an ancient fortress. Where else? On these stones. She'd been born here, true, not really, but closer to the sea. But their family had moved to this small town when Amber had just started walking. And in 18 years, the girl had become flesh of his flesh. It was a purely female family. No, of course, her grandmother had once had a husband, but Amber no longer remembered her grandfather. He had died long ago, before she was born. She had a father, too. And he was the one she remembered, and she loved him very much. But he couldn't find a job that would allow his family to live in relative poverty. So he took a job as a shift worker, flying across the country every month, far beyond the Rocky Mountains. Mom began patching holes after years of being broke. The family needed everything from new bedding to replace dilapidated ones to coats and boots for growing Amber. Dad loved the West. He told stories of bright summer nights casting tin, of funny coyotes, of moss falling underfoot in the swamps when he went huckleberry picking. But Dad had not only found his place in life, he'd also found a soulmate, someone named Lauren, who worked for him as a cook. He never came back with Lauren. Lauren had her own apartment in Sacramento, and out west, they were given a room in a dormitory for shift workers. Her father continued to send money for Amber, probably most of his Western earnings. Amber didn't want to touch them. Some call it adolescent maximalism, others call it the kind of mental purity that only comes from youth. Amber demanded the transfers be sent back. She didn't want to be tied to this man from the moment he cheated until the end of her days. The blow was stronger, for she was very attached to her father. The only daughter, used to thinking she was the most favorite. Her mother was lost, looking from Amber to her grandmother for guidance. If Amber wanted to mentally picture her mom, the first thing that came to mind was her always scared and unsure look. "You don't want the money, don't take it. You're right," Grandma said calmly, and made a sign to her daughter. "Temmie, leave her alone." "I know it's going to be hard on Mom." Amber knew what her family was thinking. "I'm going to work. There are different ways to live." "Better, worse," Grandma said. "We'll adjust. But remember about Mom, she has poor health." When the women were alone, Grandma told her daughter, "Make an account in Amber's name and put the money in that account. We'll get by somehow. The girl's conscience will be clear. If she wants to someday, and will return to his father every penny, and you can safely look into the eyes of John." Sometimes husbands tell their ex-wives they're living off their alimony. And if, God forbid, I die, that money will come in handy for Amber when she's an adult. Amber didn't know about the second part of the plan and stoically accepted the fact that their little family had the bare necessities. Her mom worked at the library, and she loved books so much that she sometimes brought them back from the dumpster. That was a trend lately. People threw away books, sometimes their own, sometimes inherited from the older generation. After all, anything could be found on the internet. Why clutter up the house with dusty tomes? Mom brought books in dirty bags, or just holding them to her chest. Their own library had grown so large that some of it had moved into the guest house in the garden. But the library paid pennies, and my mother wrote term papers and theses for students in the evenings. Behind each work was a specific goal. Things were bought the cheapest, and still ahead loomed a long list of things that could not do without, and every item on that list was a mom's sleepless night. Amber was used to not asking for anything for herself, not even a refill at the table. Too often lunch was cooked for 2 or 3 days. But the girl early had to think about how to adapt her hands and head to some business. At first, Amber helped her grandmother, twiddling her thumbs. If you compare the family to a ship that sails on the sea called everyday life, then Mom could not be called the captain. She wouldn't rise above a diligent sailor. And when my father left, Grandma took the bridge, and Amber became her right hand. Whether it was standing at the stove, peeling apricots, ironing curtains, Amber uncomplainingly learned and did everything, though her nature asked for something else, and she was not a diligent learner. Even when her father lived at home, Amber realized happiness it is when after an early breakfast, snapped out of the house, all the paths are yours, and with the sky you can be alone. And there is so much strength inside you that you perceive as an unfortunate misunderstanding the impossibility to spread your arms and fly to be swayed by warm winds. It was from her father that she got her love of vagabonding. And he also taught his daughter that when you can, all day long you are satisfied with a piece of bread taken from home. as long as it was sprinkled with salt when you memorize the roads so that you will never get lost and come back, wherever you have wandered. When you don't pay attention to fatigue, to pains in your legs, and you can walk as long as it takes, if it's worth it. And it was worth it. Amber wasn't looking for beautiful, picture-perfect views like the others. She wasn't taking selfies. She wasn't seeking out some of the youth's favorite pastimes. At first, there was simply not enough money for that, and then the girl began to feel like a white crow among her peers and did not even try to become her own in the pack. She simply did not know and could not discuss what they knew and loved, and what touched her, frightened her, amazed or delighted her, left them completely indifferent. I know what you want to be, Valerie, a classmate who sat at the same desk with Amber, and with whom Amber had a more trusting relationship than with the other kids, once told her. You want to drive field trips. This happened after the teacher assigned them to write a trivial essay about the love of their homeland. Amber was choking on the topic. There was so much to tell. She was steeped in legends as much as her hair was steeped in sea air. She wanted to talk about everything, and about her favorite gorge, near which a robber had once kidnapped a girl, and she, not resigned to her fate, became a mermaid, and about the valley, where long shadows from the rocks of bizarre, sinister figures come to life in the last hour before sunset. The rocks are motionless, and the shadows fluctuate, reaching out to each other, as if talking, gesturing without words, and about the stone, which fulfills wishes, but charges a terrible price for it. It was impossible not to mention. I read it. The teacher said to her the next day, "Tell us, I want the boys to hear it too. Tell it in your own words, maybe add something else." And instead of English class that day, the class listened to Amber. Among the children were those who went abroad with their parents every summer, or even Christmas vacation. But now they were enthusiastically questioning the girl. Where is that? Have you been there yourself? And how to get there? Do wishes really come true? That's when Valerie dropped out, tucking her textbooks into her bag. You're probably going to be a tour guide, Amber. You're a genius. When she was still in high school, she got a job at a museum complex. There were tons of them. They hired her as a curator. That meant serve, take, get out for herself, for that guy, and for the cleaning lady. And then she started leading tours. First in the low season, when it's not too crowded. Then with other, already experienced women. And now she had her own page on the internet, and on the author's excursions, which offered Amber, signed up in line. She bought a car, the loan for which she had to pay off until the second coming. And she took people to places the guides rarely went, unless they were desperate amateurs. Mostly her clients were families or young couples who were no strangers to romance. And many, many people asked enthusiastically at the end of the tour, "Don't you take them to the fortress?" Amber never took anyone to the fortress, although for a long time it was a very popular route. Until someone upstairs decided that it could be dangerous for tourists. Stones crumble, and sometimes whole blocks collapse from the fortress walls. Cave vaults collapse. It would be good to reconstruct, but there was no money for reconstruction, of course. And the excursions became illegal. They were offered as part of other routes in the vicinity. The guide tempted, "Let's pay a little more per nose and go to the most extraordinary place we have in our neighborhood." But Amber never took anyone to the fortress. It was her sanctuary. Jerry realized he had been cruelly played. He was barely alive, you might say, after a worsening ulcer. When he'd been seized that night, none of the household had thought it was that serious, or, one might even say, that bad. But Lisa did not want to long to look at the suffering of her husband. Jerry was lying in the fetal position, afraid to move, so as not to become more painful, and called an ambulance. Everyone thought that the matter would be limited to drips and hospitalization for a week. At the very least, surgery. But Jerry wasn't getting any better. The tests didn't seem to show anything critical. But the surgeon took him to the table, rather guided by intuition, which has and will continue to help real doctors. And in the process it was discovered that from the smart devices, it turns out, something can escape. And it was hard to take Jerry away from death. He came hard from anesthesia, and for several days even the strongest drugs did not significantly alleviate his suffering. The head nurse was particularly warm to him. She was the one who came up with the idea of letting Jerry sleep at all costs, because sleep is health. She persuaded the doctor to add sleeping pills to the prescribed medication. It probably wouldn't have had much effect on anyone else, but for Jerry it worked wonders. The pain was greatly reduced. He felt in himself that fracture, after which began, though slow, long, but still the way to recovery. And then his many friends came up with the idea to play his wife, which they could not stand too much. Lisa was in love with herself. And what's worse, after getting married, Jerry, who before that knew every dog in town, began to behave much more withdrawn. Now Lisa was deciding where they would go and whether they would go at all, who to invite to visit and in front of whom to close the door, and so on. When Lisa complained to her husband that she cannot tolerate women, so she does not get along in any team, for her coquetry, felt that they do not like me, because I am prettier than them, and because you carry me in your arms. But there were enough men on whom Lisa not only did not make any impression, she annoyed them. Too much manners, fixated on themselves, accustomed to being served. Lisa usually visited her husband after visiting hours were over. She and Jerry had a goodwill at the hospital, and once again Lisa was demonstrating that she was different. She didn't fill her bag with cans of hot food, she brought only fruit and water, sitting by her husband's bedside like a graceful butterfly. As she thought herself, a viper, as others thought. The prank the Powells had planned turned out to be cruel not only to Lisa, but to Jerry himself. But when they had conceived it, it had seemed so successful that the friends, as they say, had balked at the consequences. Without difficulty, they found a smashing girlfriend of one of them who agreed to play the part. They asked the same head nurse for a white coat on some pretext. One of the friends was on duty in the corridor, waiting for Lisa to arrive to give the signal. Jerry was asleep in his room. He had gotten his sleep in his sleeping pills early today, and Lisa, entering the room, caught a wild picture. The nurse was wearing almost nothing, only a conventional white robe on her shoulders. She was sitting in front of her husband in a pose that the young woman found the most obscene of all possible, legs spread, showing off her charms. The nurse was holding a plate of omelets, scooping them into a spoon and clearly about to feed Jerry. The friends knew Lisa's character well enough to calculate how she would behave. The woman didn't squeal, didn't throw a tantrum. She simply dropped her bag and stormed out of the room. A few minutes later, one of the buddies came out, smiling. The scene gave him pleasure. Let her feel for once not like a queen, but take the place she deserves, a bitch in her own right. Lisa hadn't shown up at the hospital since. When Jerry called, she hung up, and when he was discharged, he had to move back in with his parents. He hoped temporarily. Sooner or later, he and Lisa would reconcile. She didn't even notice I was asleep, Jerry lamented. They'd chosen a pose so she couldn't see my face. Except that sister's a stripper, for crying out loud. I had no idea what the bastards were up to. I call them up, and they're laughing their asses off. You should thank us for saving you from that snake. At least we gave you a break. It'll kill you. Jason listened to Jerry's wailing and went about his business. Maybe that's why Jerry came to him. He knew he'd be listened to, but not ridiculed, judged, or bombarded with advice. Jason lived a hermit's life. If it could be said of a man who didn't live in a cave or a hut, whose apartment was on the top floor of a 5-story building, a 2-bedroom in a Khrushchevka on the edge of a big city, and then the private sector began. On the balcony you could see the river. There was a bus ring curled up near the house. There was a mini market and a few stores. Jason would come down here to get groceries, and when he decided to buy what he needed, he'd go back upstairs almost immediately. But sometimes he'd still take a walk to the river. The old houses had long ago pushed the 2- and 3-story mansions away from the embankment, and there was only one way to get to the shore, past the high fences that kept out the elite from the nobility. Jason walked without realizing he was walking like a prisoner with his hands behind his back, standing by the water for long periods of time. Even if it was windy and damp, the Mississippi was cold just to look at. Sometimes he took a different route and went up into the mountains. It was a short walk to them, just a couple of streets, and here he was at the foot of one of them. And a paved road serpentine led to the top. It was used to take children to the camp every day. There was a mast on the mountain. There was also a radio and television station. The serpentine lengthened the way a little, but it was not worth going straight ahead. There were vipers on the slopes when it was warm, and he had to be careful not to step on one. None of Jason's friends lived like him. They considered him a crank, but agreed that perhaps his profession required it. Jason wrote books. Those who had known him for years said that he had been different before, a romantic with a wanderlust, an athlete who had achieved a lot. A man who was open-minded, even overly so. And Jason had met his Emily on one of his camping trips. Both of them were the kind of reckless people that old songs talk about. The old compass is calibrated, the maps and edges are obtained, and to you, to storms like avalanches, the treacherous trail. Happy to whom the pinching feeling of the road is familiar, but where the wind tears horizons and blows the dawn. Jason brought the girl to his town right after that hike, straight from the Appalachians. They'd rented a room, then inherited the apartment, which Jason had never changed since. And for the few years he and Emily lived here, their house was open to everyone. There wasn't an evening when friends didn't gather, and even the neighbors would come over to listen to guitar songs and say, "You guys don't need a TV." Jason was writing his second book at the time. The first was well received, and it gave him confidence that the path is chosen correctly. You just need to go and go on it, every day marking the right number of steps. Well, that is lines. Jason went to the sea to finish the novel, and Emily, of course, went with him. It was already low season, and prices were down, so it was hoped that it would be possible to live by the sea for a few months. Money was still tight, but in late October, Jason returned home to bury Emily. The young woman's death had been a tragic accident, but even among her closest friends, no one knew anything for sure. It seemed that Emily had crashed after falling from a height, either during an excursion or during an outing with her husband in the mountains, or maybe on the rocks. It was believable. The boys were not particularly careful, and they'd had all sorts of adventurous adventures before. Emily was buried in a closed casket. Jason hadn't notified anyone about the funeral. Whoever found out by chance showed up, and it was immediately apparent that Jason had changed dramatically. He was silent as if he had water in his mouth, hardly answering questions, ignoring condolences, and apparently wanting to be left alone. Well, grief affects everyone differently. Some people go to people to cry on someone else's shoulder, and some people don't want to expose the bleeding wound in their soul. Eventually, they got rid of Jason, gave him a chance to live the life he now wanted, and he craved privacy. From then on, he spent most of his time in the apartment, allowing himself nothing but occasional walks. But he still wrote books. True, they had changed. If before they were novels, twisted plot, where the adventures of the heroes did not give the reader an extra breath, then now Jason apparently was not capable of such a thing. Once he was fond of biathlon, took places in competitions, and now wrote stories about sports in the style of realism, with knowledge, but not so exciting anymore. Before he had a rifle for biathlon and excellent skis. When he gave up sports, he sold it all, but later he bought a gun again, an expensive hunting rifle. Now it hung over his bed at home. It was probably the most valuable thing in the house. "What do you need it for?" John asked him one day. He went to his friend's house more often than anyone else. Jason hadn't completely closed the door on his old friends, and everyone knew they could come to him and ask to stay for a few days. For example, if there was a family quarrel. And now John was practically living at his place. You don't go hunting anyway. You say you can't kill anyone. Jason looked at his friend without a smile. Maybe I'm just saying that. Or was it before? John was confused. He didn't know whether to take it as a joke or as. There was something about Jason's look that. Until now, he'd been sure that his friend was incapable of raising a hand against anyone. Now all he had to do was break the awkward pause and turn the conversation to something else. Well, that was easy. "How am I supposed to make up with Lisa?" John asked wistfully. "She not only does not want to talk to me on the phone, but also does not let me home." It was clear to everyone Lisa wants to be begged for forgiveness. But in her heart, she's also afraid that John won't have the patience. She's walking the line. In her version, John should demonstrate such a degree of remorse and beg for forgiveness in such ways that it becomes legendary among mutual acquaintances. But there's another option: John could give up and find someone else. Then Lisa, too, will have to start her life from scratch. And there's nothing worse for her. "I don't understand," Jason said. "What are you worried about? Is Lisa alive? That's the most important thing. And the rest." And he waved his hand. So John stopped talking and couldn't say anything else. Amber had a piece of jewelry in her left ear, an earring. For some reason, a single, small ruby drop. It had been threaded in her lobe for as long as Amber could remember. The earring was discreet, and Amber hardly ever thought about it, except once, when she decided at 13 to really pierce both ears and put earrings in. Girls that age have a tendency to want nothing more than earrings in their ears at a certain point in their lives. "Okay, let's go to the beautician." Mom agreed when Amber couldn't resist telling her what she wanted. "And for your birthday, I'll give you earrings gold. Of course I cannot, but silver." "I'll take this one off." Amber picked up a red droplet with her fingernail. She'd lost her pair anyway. "I'm like a pirate, wearing it in one ear." "No, Mom and Grandma," exclaimed at the same time. "Why? Is there something I don't know? Is this some kind of family legend? Do you cherish Sergei as a memory?" Amber looked from one woman to another, and she could feel her loved ones hesitating to tell her anything. "Just put it on and consider it a fairy tale," her grandmother added. Amber's eyes lit up. Scary tales were her favorite thing in the world. She'd read them all at the children's library, and she loved the ones with the lions, mermaids, and sorcerers more than the funny stories about girls and bunnies. When you read such things, at night you dare to go out of your room to the toilet, only if you light up the light in the whole apartment. And if some mysticism lives in their family's history, how did their loved ones hope to keep anything from her? Inga's mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone was going to let it slip, it would be her. But Antonina only averted her eyes. "Yes," Grandma had begged. "Let's hope that everyone has already forgotten everything," said Inga's grandmother. "Does this thing bother you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And remember that you don't need to know everything." "But it's my ear." "We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time," Mom sighed. She caught her grandmother's glance, stopped talking half a word, and as if cut off. No matter how much Inga pestered her, her mother never said a word on the subject. And only much later, having resorted to the unworthy technique of eavesdropping, Inga at least roughly understood what the matter was. Mother often came to her grandmother's house to sit up before going to bed. No matter how tired she was, but to talk, to discuss what had happened during the day, to complain about something, to ask for advice, it was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit down next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the fragments of these whispers that Inga learned the story. Once in that old fortress on the mountain lived the rulers of the area. Imagine that. Where now only the wind walks through empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, not even ruins, and all the stones have been scattered. There used to be life. And thousands of people walk daily along the roads paved with stones. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. And the master of these places had unlimited power. His house should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress. Blank walls, windows only in the courtyard. It was the largest and stood on the edge of the cliff, and inside. It was known, but no one could tell you about it in detail. There were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who had angered the master, or prisoners whom he hoped to exchange for a favorable exchange, were imprisoned here for 20 years. As the years passed, the fortress ceased to play its role. There was no need for people to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer and fewer inhabitants. It was a kind of a test to climb the mountains every day, to live near the sky, but to save water for everything else, to go down to the valley for every little thing. There remained old people and those who are faithful to tradition, who want to die close to their native hearth and be buried in the old cemetery next to their loved ones. There came a time when the master's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years, they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something among them. There was something about the old lords. All members of the clan continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom the land belonged, along with all the people living on it. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but really rules, who decides the question of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then Inge was about 5 or 6 years old, and she liked such outings very much. Though her family did not make them very often, there was always either work or not enough money. But several times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for a whole day to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy the favorite places, have lunch somewhere in a cafe, wander through the stores where they sell what they do not have in their town, and come home at nightfall to both mother and grandmother. And if any mysticism lived in their family's history, loved ones hoped to keep something from her. Mom was clearly the weaker link. If anyone had let it slip, it was her. But Emily only averted her eyes. "Let's hope everyone's forgotten," Jacob's grandmother pleaded. "Is that thing bothering you?" "No." "Then forget about it. And And remember, you don't need to know everything. But it's my ear. We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, Mom sighed, catching her grandmother's gaze. She stopped talking halfway through the conversation, and just like that, she was cut off. No matter how much Amber pestered her, Mom never said another word on the subject. It wasn't until much later, when she resorted to the unseemly trick of eavesdropping, that Amber realized at least roughly what was going on. Mom often came to Grandma's house to sit up before bed, no matter how tired she was. Talking, discussing what had happened during the day, complaining about something, asking for advice that was more important than sleep. Sometimes my mother would sit next to my grandmother on the edge of the sofa and whisper with her for so long that she would immediately fall asleep. And it was from the scraps of those whispers that Amber learned the story. The rulers of the area had once lived in that old fortress on the mountain. To think where now only the wind walks the empty streets, where there are almost no houses left, even the ruins and those are scattered on the stones, before there was a boiling life. Thousands of people walked the stone-paved roads every day. Water was brought up from the valley. There was a school, a market, and of course fortress walls. And the master of these places had unlimited power. His house, which should have been called a palace, but it was too much like a fortress with blank walls and windows only to the courtyard, was the largest and stood on the very edge over the cliff. And inside it was known, but no one could tell about it in detail, there were dungeons. There was even a place where executions were carried out. It happened that those who angered the master, or prisoners, whom he hoped to exchange favorably, were imprisoned here for 20 years. Over the years, the fortress ceased to play its role. People had no need to hide behind its walls, and there were fewer and fewer inhabitants. To live near the sky, but to save on all other water, to go down to the valley for every little thing, it is a kind of a test. There remained old people, and those who were faithful to tradition, who wanted to die close to their native hearth, and be buried in the old cemetery next to their relatives. There came a time when the host's family also left their home. Now the former rulers of the area lived down by the sea. Over the years, they seemed to blend in with the rest of the people, but they did not get lost. There was something of the former rulers in the family. All of them continued to consider themselves a superior race, those to whom this land together with all the people living on it belonged. And necessarily one of the men of the family became, as they would say in Italy, the local don, the one who unofficially but truly rules, who decides matters of life and death, to whom they go to bow and who takes cruel revenge on those who hurt his interests. They came to the sea then. Amber was about 5 or 6 years old, and she loved such outings, though the household did not make them very often. There was always work or not enough money. But a few times during the summer they still got in the car and went to the sea for the day, to swim, sit on the shore, enjoy their favorite places, eat lunch in a cafe, wander through the stores that sell things they don't have in their town, and with darkness falling, return home to their mother and grandmother. That day couldn't help but stick in the memory. Amber was wearing a light blue plaid sundress. She was already badly tanned, her blonde hair tangled by the wind. The beach was less crowded than usual. The wind, carrying sand in the face, scared away the vacationers, and the waves on the sea had risen. But Amber ran along the edge of the shore, once on the ankle ran into the water, then retreated so that the wave did not cover her head, then snatched out of the water some particularly brightly colored pebble. Even her mother, who was far from any creativity, was admiring her daughter at this moment. If there was an artist or photographer here now, he would definitely admire how good Amber was. The girl didn't know that another couple was watching her father and son, who were in a tent nearby. Not everyone could afford to rent a beach house, so most of the tents were empty. But on this windy day, the father and son were more comfortable with the brightly colored fabric protecting them from the flying sand. Look, said a boy of about 12, pointing to Amber. There was something haughty in his oriental appearance and mannerisms. Her father looked at the girl and raised his eyebrows questioningly. So, well, you choose who you like, the boy explained. And don't tell me that's not true. I'm not a little kid anymore, I know. Who told you what? Father asked nonchalantly. Yes, I know about the girl who jumped out of the window and crashed, too. Father stretched, put his hands behind his head and said, looking at the sea. Well, you see, our wishes don't always end well. But that's for you. It's different for me, the boy objected. The father grinned. Sonny Emir was the only person who could speak to him like that. No, He hadn't been brought up in the Oriental way, where a child is allowed to do anything until a certain age. Emir knew his turns, knew how to behave properly if he had to. And yet he had no fear of his father, and deep down he was sure that he would go much further than him. Every now and then it would come out. "Did you like her that much?" "I don't think she was pretty," Emir asked. "How much do you understand?" There was no embarrassment in his father's voice. He was just uncomfortable with the story. "Well, you chose that one, and I choose this one. I like her." "What are you going to do with her?" "Nothing for now. Let her live. When she's old enough, I'll take her back to our place." "You're like a Turk. They used to kidnap their brides." My father's tone was mocking, but there was genuine warmth in it. "I think it was more slaves," the boy said, surprised. Amber had been running up and down the beach, and now she wanted to swim. She was already pretty good in the water, but since her father wasn't with them, her grandmother made her wear a child's inflatable vest that fastened in the front with a drawstring. Amber ran to beg for permission to swim and was animatedly telling her grandmother something, gesticulating. Paul, his father, called to the gray-haired man who always accompanied them. He immediately bent down to his master. "Do you know who they are? From their appearance, it seems that if they have come, they have not come from far away." "Yes, Herman Yefimovich. We'd like to secure the girl for the future, so to speak." Pavel didn't point directly at Amber, but made a certain movement with his eyes. I see your point." Emir smirked. He realized that he had allowed himself more than usual, had behaved even brazenly, and was quite sure that his father would refuse him. But he had chosen a good day, and his father was in a good mood. And in general, it doesn't hurt to check the boundaries of permissible from time to time. Grandma and Mom were shocked when Paul and the makeup girls from the beauty parlor showed up at their house in the evening. Chewing gum in her mouth, one of them pierced Amber's ear and stuck an earring in it. The maiden, however, was apparently not evil. She chatted with the girl and said that they bring 2-year-olds to her, and in general there is nothing to talk about. 1, 2 and done. That earring is very pretty. It's a stone. Ruby, the stone of love. And it has a tiny little seal on it that you can see if you look closely. The family tried to be indignant at first, to say that it was out of the question, but Paul repeated twice something that frightened everyone, and hinted that misunderstandings with this man could end badly. After all, taking Amber away now is the easy part, and there's little the police can do to help to everyone. The girl will just go missing. It happens, and trying to hide or take her away isn't an option either. If you get the urge, they'll get you from under the ground. Don't cry. Humanly speaking, I understand. I'll tell you what, no one will touch you now. Live as you have lived, raise your little girl. So much that all this will be forgotten quickly, and no one will ever remember you or that earring. But for some reason they put it on try not to cry. Mom, who was scared out of her wits, wiped away her tears with the palm of her hand. Paul shrugged. Well, what can you do when you're talking about a child? A ring or a bracelet. The baby is growing, the jewelry will quickly become tight. She'll lose the tip. An earring is a reliable thing. Did the slave owners think so too? Grandma put it in. Her voice was creaky for some reason. Stepfather Paul looked at her carefully. Well, you got it right. Once again I say, I'm almost certain that everything will be fine. With that he bowed out. That's the phrase the relatives clung to. If you sit quietly, do not try to fight, argue. If you do not get on the road, and look, it will pass. And it was hard to imagine a quieter life than the family led in the following years. Their town is small, less than 30,000 people live here, and it's 24 kilometers from the sea, so even in the summer there is no such pandemonium as on the coast. Mostly those who are interested in history come here. After all, on the maps of this place appeared in the 16th century. And there are plenty of real antiquities here. Caves along the lawn, in the mountains and rocks, where the first settlers huddled so densely that in some places the slopes of the mountains resemble honeycombs. But if you don't go where the tourists take you, the town is quiet and sleepy. Narrow streets, blank stone fences. That's the fence Amber grew up behind. And then when she reached out to people herself, when she started working at the museum, the terrible incident was somehow forgotten and erased from her memory. It's been too many years. It's definitely forgotten now. Amber and her red mark. Her mother secretly followed the fate of the owner, knew that he lived abroad for several years. And when his father came back, his son was still out there somewhere. Yes, he studied in Europe. Mother knew that the master's distant ancestors had once owned a fortress, and now he had built himself a house before which the old fortress was only a pale reflection, a real castle on the seashore. And grandmother used to say that he sits there, God forgive him, like a spider to which the threads of everything dark, gloomy, illegal in their land are drawn. And the guy eventually came back. Why? Why wasn't he in Europe? His father had decided to gradually bring him up to speed, to hand over the reins of power. I just hoped Amber never met him. Amber would take the guests in her old car. Usually the less discerning ones would agree, and she'd drive them around the sites. Or her clients did not agree to drive anything but their own foreign cars. And then in the agreed place sat in their car, and then already took on the role of a guide. Today's job was a little more unusual than before. She had to pick up these guys right at the station. They'd arrived in a matter of days. Sports competitions, a tight schedule, and they wished for such a program. They'd get off the train and go on a tour. And then it's back to the hotel. What's Amber's main concern? That the group was small. As always, she never took more than 4 or 5 people, usually less. And the money had already been transferred to her card. So she stood on the platform and watched the cars slowly pass by. She recognized her clients at once, 3 young guys. One look at them and immediately diagnosed them as basketball players, and an older man with them. Even his whiskers are graying. The guys must have been inspired by the fact that their guide was such a young girl. But Amber, with a restrained smile, responded to the jokes at the attempted flirting, and then she got everyone in the car so that the oldest in the group was next to her in the front seat. The part of the road ahead was boring, through the steppe. Sometimes cab drivers ask passengers to talk to me, or I'm afraid I'll doze off at the wheel. But Amber was in no danger of that. After all, there were the steppe yaks and their battles, their chiefs, their mounds. Even here she managed to tell fascinating stories, poured the bird, and listened that tourists almost sighed with regret when the sea showed in the distance. After all, that meant the end of the story. She spoke to herself, looking in the mirror at the man sitting next to her. He reminded her of an elephant. Maybe it's called a Roman profile. But it seemed to Amber that his forehead went so smoothly, without curves, into his nose that it looked like a short elephant trunk. Amber thought back to last winter. She'd gotten lucky with an order then. She'd patronized a group flying in from St. Petersburg like chickens, and they hadn't wanted to let her go. They asked her to celebrate New Year's Eve with them at one of the most luxurious recreation centers. This, in addition to the fee for excursions. Those days were strange. Here, in their climate, where it rarely snows, it happens that you cannot wait for the whole winter. But then the New Year's week was snowy, and tourists did not know what kind of entertainment to think up. They skated on the artificial ice, and the bathhouse, that's for sure, and the equestrian club, and some even ordered a helicopter. And of course the New Year's celebration itself, when in a cafe stylized as a Russian terem, set the tables and until morning was to continue the fun and dancing. And Amber then ran away. She served her part with the band all evening in the arena and escaped to the cottage where they had put her up. One of the guests went after her. It was a dark-haired, pleasant, middle-aged man. He brought champagne and brought no hindsight. It was just that he was an introvert and didn't want to spend the rest of the night in a crowd. Better to sit in the living room with this nice girl, look at the fire in the fireplace and through the panoramic windows at the snow-covered, garland-lit forest, drink champagne and talk. Igor was married and regretted that it turned out so that his Olga could not come. Suddenly swamped with things at work, and the vouchers were already bought, and Olga kicked him out to rest for 2. And that's when Igor told Amber, "I think that every person is like some animal. And you? I'm like a dog, I guess." From Amber's point of view, he looked like a raccoon, short in stature, graceful, with deep-set and dark eyes. But Amber had remained silent out of politeness. But now she remembered him, because elephant was a very subtle definition. This time she drove the guests around almost until the evening. She showed them the main resort town. The local nice went aboard a sailing ship with them. It used to be filmed a lot in movies, but now it was a bar. They stood on the observation decks, drank water from the spring, drowned in legends, and bought as a souvenir burlap bags with fragrant herbs. The final point was a restaurant where they served fish that was still swimming in the sea in the morning. She was treated to local wines. Then Amber had to take her guests to the doorstep of the hotel. She didn't drink much wine, but the guys got pretty drunk. They felt like they were friends forever. And they asked Emily to come cheer them on at the competition tomorrow. "Can I ask you a favor?" the older man asked. Amber recognized him. His name was Jason, and he wasn't a coach or some kind of chaperone, just a friend of one of the boys' fathers, and he'd come along for the ride. She raised her eyebrows at him now, smiling welcomingly, but she really didn't like these unexpected requests. There was no telling what would pop into her head. "Amber, don't you take me to the fortress?" Kyle interrupted, and after the third drink he decided to switch to you with her. "No, I can't go to the fortress." "Why not?" Kyle's voice trailed off. You had to listen to him to make out the words. "Grandmother won't let me go." Kyle looked at her in amazement. "It's dangerous. Caves crumbling. Underground mazes. She won't let me in." "Well, what do you want?" Amber explained. Like her, Jason hadn't had much to drink that night. "There's a Gregory Evans living here. He's the landlord." Jason began slowly, "and they say he's built himself a castle that would make an English queen jealous. I'd like to take a closer look at it. I understand about private property and all that. But will you take me to a place where I can get a good view of the castle? I know it's over the top, but I'll pay." Amber stopped the car where few people would. Only someone who knows every rock, every ledge in the area. The road was narrow, a steep slope to the left, the sea below. Here, a dense forest. But at the sight of it, Amber remembered the marshes. The green and lush crowns gave the deceptive impression of a carpet. It looked like moss from afar, but you couldn't step on it. You'd fall through. Onto the right rose steep cliffs. Such cliffs can be climbed only with mountaineering equipment. No stranger would park here. But Amber found a small ledge. She parked her car so it wouldn't get in the way of anyone driving by. It wasn't a busy road, though it led to nowhere, to a small village with no sights, nothing of interest to tourists. "Here," Jason started, "I'll show you the path." Amber led him to a little noticeable path that went steeply downward, but still allowed him to get down to the sea. "Divers used to love this place," Amber explained. "They used to have a different road so you could drive a car to the water. These guys always have their gear with them. You know, tents, stuff like that. It's a lot of cargo. And then when they built the castle, they blocked the road. There was even a court case in the end. You know, between the people have a right and private property won. Some people tried to give a damn. Mostly not the people who live here, but the people who come here every year to snorkel. The water here is clear, and it feels like you're not swimming, but floating in the blue sky like an angel. Well, someone tried to ride like they used to. True, they chose a time when it was usually quiet early morning, late evening. They hoped no one would notice them. But people invariably stood on the road, guards, you wouldn't believe it, with real weapons, automatic rifles or something like that. All kinds of camouflage on their chests. So we realized it was serious, so we stopped trying. There's still this trail, it's off to the side. It was laid by the most stubborn. There's a forest almost all the way to the sea. You can go down and snorkel. It's a little awkward to climb back, but you can see the castle from there. Jason stared at her for a few seconds. Amber couldn't tell at once what she saw in that look of gratitude, but it was clearly something else. "Thank you, Amber." Anything further, he held out the money to her. But the girl only took one of the bills out of his hand. She was always honest about her work and didn't take tips. "How will you get out of here?" "Hitchhike." "There's a hitchhiker every half hour or an hour or less," Jason shrugged. It was a small thing to him. "Let me wait for you. My mom says the owner's so reclusive because the 90s aren't over for him." "No, girl," Jason said softly. "It all started earlier, much earlier, and thank you for the offer. But I'd like to be alone, and thank you also for the fact that without you, I wouldn't have found this path." He nodded his goodbye and started down the path, recognizing it for what it was. In some places, he had to hold on to tree roots to keep his balance. Sometimes the path was blocked by ravines, into which one had to descend and then climb down their slippery clay slopes. Really, you had to love diving to come here. Besides, whatever Jason was up to, it wouldn't be worth the delay. It was getting dark soon, and darkness in the south fell quickly, almost in an instant. It must have been about 20 minutes when the shore came into view. The forest had receded, and he saw a narrow strip of large pebbles. He also saw the castle. It rose up on his right hand and seemed to rise out of the sea, though it was built on a low cliff. It was built of stone of gray, but of such a dark shade that now in the evening light the castle seemed black. Some historian, architect, or art critic would have been tempted to argue that the castle was built in accordance with the traditions of the people who had lived here for centuries. It had nothing in common with Gothic and with those castles and palaces that could not protect their owners from enemies but were works of art in themselves. No, the man who built such a thing thought first of all of his own safety. Blank walls, windows as narrow as loopholes, gates as tall as 3 men. How much evil had to be done to be so afraid of retribution? And Jason remembered the morning Emily had disappeared. He sat at his computer early. He worked best in the morning hours. His head wasn't so clear after that. Emily brought him coffee, came up behind him. All he saw was her hand with the inexpensive metal bracelet. She was placing a steaming cup in front of him. Then he felt the touch of her lips on his hair. Emily kissed him lightly. "I'm off to the market." "Can you believe it's all over?" "Not even breakfast," she said. Engrossed in his work, he didn't realize until 10 o'clock when he felt hungry. Emily hadn't returned by then. It was unbearably sickening to think of what had followed. Desperate searching and terror in his soul from the first minute. Somehow he had been certain from the beginning that something very bad, terribly bad, had happened that could not be undone. Emily couldn't get lost, couldn't hang out with her friends. She didn't have any friends here either. Go to a movie or go swimming. Trouble happened. Emily was found about 2 weeks later on a beach just like this, by the water. And there was no way of knowing how she could have gotten there. She was lying on the rocks, a broken doll in tattered clothes. And it was only her face that her death had made completely calm. The police, who up to that point had been honestly searching for the young woman, suddenly led further investigation, as if they were certain of the only theory. And it was hardly Jason's fault. "You must have had a fight," the investigator insinuated. So she left. She'd taken her own life, as they say. Jason stared at her with shocked eyes. He couldn't even speak. He was at a loss for words. Emily was the most precious thing in his life. What would he be without her? Quite possibly just carelessness. The investigator retreated a little. The grounds here were beautiful. She wanted to get a closer look. The rocks under her feet crumbled, and she took off. "Are you saying that right from the market with a heavy bag without saying anything to anyone?" Emily went far away to admire the views. "And that's not bullshit to you?" The investigator shrugged. "Well, it's not like a woman can think of anything." It wasn't until later, asking everyone himself, that Jason found a young merchant who told him. "I saw Emily being pushed into the car." "It happens to us," the trader said, averting his eyes. "Usually these women come back after a while. You were just unlucky." From the same man, Jason had learned about the all-powerful owner of this place. It's no use going to the police with this. He's not only got it in his pocket, they're scared shitless of him. And as you know, I wouldn't be a witness. Life, excuse me, is more precious. You're already attracting a lot of attention. You'll come home one day and his men will tell you to leave immediately, or they'll find you. Just like that, on the beach. Or maybe they won't find you at all. Wrap it up. You can't fight a crowbar, as they say. And Jason somehow knew Emily hadn't been killed. I mean, not literally killed. She'd gotten a minute and either tried to escape but failed or just threw herself from a height. She had never been afraid of heights in the mountains. One had to watch out for others all the time, keep an eye on her. And heights had done her one last favor. It had saved her from something Emily couldn't bear. Jason had taken her advice, but not because he'd decided to accept it, to forgive it, to forget it. It was just that the master's power here was absolute now, an armor in which no vulnerability could be found. But if you wait, if you put your whole life into waiting for your hour, your minute, your one and only minute, that chance would come sooner or later. Amber was waiting for him by the car. She was squatting on her haunches, picking through small stones, looking for clear quartz shards. It was a habit of hers. "Let's go," she said, getting up and shaking her palms off her shorts. "I knew you'd come out of the dark. I waited." He was genuinely surprised. "How could I leave you?" And yet the light was almost out. And the first thing Amber did when she got behind the wheel was turn on the headlights. "Mom, Let's get out of here. I'm scared for some reason. Amber didn't expect those words to come out of her mouth. She'd known about her master her whole life, as long as she could remember, and she'd been to these places near his castle many times. But today this stranger, so strange, so a little like an elephant, by his mere presence stirred her. Now she had a premonition of bad things to come. Like an animal senses an earthquake coming. Her mother had just fed Amber some fried potatoes, poured her some tea, and returned to her knitting. "Where are we going?" she asked. There was a certain irritation in her voice. She knew Amber must have known that they were trapped and had nowhere to go. There wasn't a penny to spare in the family and no relatives or acquaintances willing to take them in. And how do you leave home? It's the only thing they got. Mom lived here for years without ever leaving. She was afraid of everything. She had never been abroad. She was afraid of foreign passports, a foreign language, incomprehensible money, which was incomprehensible how much it would be in rubles. At the first store you would be left without a penny. And my mother was afraid of her country, 2 trains with drunken shift workers, airplanes that crashed, pimps at train stations, swindlers and thieves. "If I go to my dad's?" Amber asked. "There's almost a direct train there, with only one change at the very end." "Don't even think about it." Mom jumped up. "He really needs you. He's already got a son and a daughter. Let him take care of them." "I'm not saying move in with him," Amber corrected her mom gently. "Just in the same town as him. Maybe he'll give me a job and then I'll get an apartment. I'm an adult, Mom, and you're wrong to say he doesn't want me. He's been sending me money for my birthday all these years, you know it. It's in your book." Grandma looked at Mom with an expression that clearly said, "See, I was right," and Mom was embarrassed. But she quickly found a clue. "No, no, no, no. I'm not letting you on a train across the country." "I had an acquaintance," Grandma said melancholically. She was older than me. As a child, she survived in the trenches of Stalingrad. Then she graduated from a fishery technical school and was sent to Sakhalin. She was small in stature, with a point, black eyes, and a big bow in her braid. She traveled with geologists to Vladivostok on a train across the country on the 3rd shelf somewhere, because there were not enough seats. Then by boat to the island, and worked there as a foreman at the combine. Her mother's eyes darted, fingers begging her to stop this conversation, not to lead Amber astray. Amber went to the fortress. It was a kind of place of power for her. The ruins had been closed off from tourists for a while permanently. The risk of accidents had become too great, and the caves and underground passages had to be reinforced to prevent an unexpected collapse. But there was no place in their neighborhood where Amber didn't know the secret paths. Leaving the car at the foot of the hill, she began to climb up the mountain. And the town died out. Here and there remnants of towers, crooked streets half erased by time, a cemetery. Caves, roofed in the rocks, long ago deserted dwellings, debris, stones, dust and ashes, where the eye finds no joy. 2 or 3 families, like shadows, wander among the bare walls, but barracks for them are native hearths and the temple of their fathers. A black car, over which smooth circles, soaring, draws an eagle on the mountain heights. These lines, written long ago, really came to life here, in these ancient walls, although now it was no longer possible to meet even 2 or 3 families here. Amber had spent the night here once. Of course, withheld from her loved ones, not on a bet, and not with a young man. It was just that since childhood she had felt her belonging to this ancient fortress, her kinship with those who lived here. It was well known about her host's ancestors that they owned the very house of which only ruins remained. But Amber knew from somewhere that her great-grandparents had come from this area. Maybe one of them had been a potter or a small merchant who went down to town every day, set up shop. Or maybe there isn't even dust left of their house now. But their souls, they were still here. These people, generation after generation, had survived here, where every drop of water was precious, and where even grass grew so sparsely on the sun-hot rocks. Survived, fought off enemies, and stayed here after the master's family left. Which meant this place was theirs by right, not stolen from them by legal violence. Amber told her friend at home that she'd stay the night, but she went up to the fortress in the late afternoon and found a spot near the crossroads. There were bushes of dried wormwood poking through the paving stones. There was still a stone arch over one of the roads. Nearby were 2 nations' ancient temples. One simpler, smaller, trimmed in wood, the other larger, with heavy columns, with doors that in Amber's memory were perpetually locked, though she peered through the windows, trying to see what was inside. The sunset made the fortress an absolutely fantastic sight, and it was particularly vivid itself. It seemed that Amber had never seen such vivid colors of the sky, rich purples, golds, and purples. It was the hour when that which was unimaginable and fabulous in the daytime awakens all the otherworldly power whose breath is in the air in a way that cannot be put into words. Amber sat here until dawn. At times she was sure she could make out faint light shadows, swift or slow, but she felt no fear. She waited for someone to speak to her, or to give her some sign. Above her head were large stars, like grains of shining salt. Every now and then a long streak of a meteorite could be seen. Amber remembered her childhood. She'd been given a little Umka telescope, and it had been a real shock for her to see for herself, with her own eyes, that the moon was not a golden disk, so natural in the night sky and in pictures that it was almost unnoticeable. No, the moon is a stone ball, riddled with lunar craters, and it hangs in the black void of space. It's one thing to read about it, but it's another to see it. It took her a long time to catch a glimpse of meteors, even though her grandmother had told her, "There's a bright one coming." When Amber finally saw the flying stars, she remembered her father's hands as he struck a match to light a cigarette, and she thought maybe God was doing it up there in the sky. Then her legs got stiff, and she stood up, thinking that every step she took would make a thudding sound on the paving stones beneath her feet. But she walked quite silently, like a spirit, reached the temple and stroked one of the columns. It was a movement of which she was not aware to herself. And then she walked down the alley under the archway, and inhaling the bitter odor of wormwood, thought that this was what the stars smelled like. She did not go down into the dungeon, though she had been there before. But she had not brought a flashlight, and without it she was afraid of tripping on the steps, stumbling, falling somewhere. So she walked outside the fortress walls and went to the tomb, the obelisk above which was particularly high on the mountainside. Amber knew that a very young girl was buried here. She had died while even younger than Amber was now. A girl from a wealthy family had carried water to the fortress during the siege. Skinny as she was, she managed to slip between the bars of the fence. She made the journey again and again with the heavy burden, and her heart failed her. The bird girl. Then Amber met the dawn next to the grave, but there was still no fear. On the contrary, the feeling that she was not alone was growing in her. Of course, Amber never said a word at home about her nighttime escapade. Mom would have been heartbroken, and Grandma would have freaked out in hindsight. But many times after that, Amber had come here in times of need to regain her inner strength and composure. And now she sat in complete silence for a long time on the grass at the edge of the road. Only the wind ruffled her hair and occasionally sang in the narrow streets like the distant sound of strings. Today she was driving a new group of husband, wife, and 2 children. The family didn't want to buy shared excursions. With children, you can never guess what if they get carsick, have to stop the car, and what if they get thirsty or have to go back. And the program the mother and father asked to adjust to the children. The girl was 8 and the boy was 5. Not tiring, not hot, interesting, and a place to get drunk and eat. Amber took them to the Museum of Fairy Tales and walked with her guests along the paths of the park for a long time, talking about fairy tale characters as well as an experienced guide. She worried while the children wondered and marveled to their heart's content to have their pictures taken. Then they had a snack at the cafe and had to finish the day at the observation deck. We had to give the adults a chance to admire the beauty of the area too. For Amber, the main charm was the sea always alive, with its brightest holiday colors blue, 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 green, and the vegetation still below. Drowning in the greenery of the southern city was very nice. It was a weekday, and this observation deck was not one of the most famous. So when they'd come here, Amber had figured and had no doubt already that they'd be alone on the platform. But at the very last moment they were cut off by a car, a white Cherokee Jeep. It cut them off so unexpectedly and brazenly that it could have been bad. Amber almost drove off the road, and that would have been a disaster. Serpentine roads everywhere, steep slopes everywhere. She felt an icy dread. Not so much for herself, but for the strangers in the car. Damn it. She almost never argued with other drivers, never got into arguments. And though almost always, if something happened on the road, it wasn't her fault, Amber swallowed the chicken that you can't let those women drive and the brainless blonde just as long as they'd leave her alone. But now, when she saw that the Jeep had stopped near the same lot where they were headed, Amber couldn't help herself. She slammed the door and strode toward the black car, taking the distance between them in 4 strides. "Are you crazy?" She lashed out at the guy who stepped on the ground. "Do you realize you almost got us all killed?" And she faltered. Because this Ambo looked at her without the slightest sense of guilt, with such a slight smirk, as if not a person, but a bug he got on the road, which he was about to crush with his foot. And then she recognized him. His portrait was not published in the newspapers, but she often found references to him and his photographs on the internet. Too often the owner's son was involved in all sorts of stories. And usually in a car he'd race with his friends at breakneck speed through the city at night and hit someone, or he'd get into a fight he'd provoked, or there'd be an absolutely scandalous orgy party, for no one had the courage to call it anything else. Resentment struggled with fear in Amber. Especially as it turned out, Emir wasn't traveling alone in the car. He never rode alone, and two of his friends of the same age and perhaps even stronger build were now standing beside him, grinning just as unkindly. Amber remembered the earring. She wanted to see if it covered her hair, but didn't dare. She could only hope that the curly blonde strands hid her earlobes, but it was a futile hope. "I remember you," Emir said, ignoring Amber's anger, ignoring her mood. "Were you the one slapping bare heels on the beach back then? You couldn't forget me either. You're still wearing my sign." He looked at her like a landlord coming home to check on his possessions. "You were such a little girl then. I thought you'd never grow up to be anything good. But you turned out to be pretty good." The tourists started getting out of the car. Amber should have gone with them, but she stood stiffly as the owner's son walked around her, looking at her from every angle. Looking at her from every angle. "Where do you live? What do you care? What do you really care? Because you're coming with us now." "I'm not." "Who's going to ask you?" The smirk got even wider. Amber knew it was useless to yell. There was no one around to stand up for her but the father of the family. Still, as she was dragged to the car, she cast desperate glances at the family. Unless these people were afraid, if they could tell. You didn't see anything one of the customers approached them, after the Jeep door had already slammed shut and swallowed Amber. "Is that clear? But how are we going to get out of here? We don't even know where we are." The man didn't dare say anything, the woman decided. And his voice wasn't shaking. "Shuttle you'll catch." With these words, the guy got into the car and the Jeep sped off so sharply that it almost drove over the tourists' legs. They barely had time to bounce, and a few more minutes coughing because such a dust rose. The adults were so impressed by the experience that they could not immediately begin to talk, although the children, and break them, trying to understand what was happening. It was late in the evening when Amber's mother came to the hotel where the family was staying. She was distraught and found her daughter's notebook, where Amber had written down the schedule of her excursions and the phone numbers of her clients. Only she, this crying woman, not the police, had dared to tell the husband and wife what had happened on the observation deck. But they didn't remember the license plate number, saying they were in shock. They didn't care. And they stood firm on that. They couldn't give us a good description of the guy. A big guy in a black t-shirt with some friends with him. And then they watched through the window as the small figure of a woman, covering her face with her hands, went away. Into the night. "Just don't throw me into a thorn bush," the phrase popped into Amber's head. And it somehow became the only thing she could cling to like a lifeline. They'd been driving for about 10 minutes now. Amber was sandwiched in the back seat between two thugs. She tried to ignore their dirty jokes. She was the only one who needed to scratch out a ghostly chance at salvation. "Are you taking me to the castle?" Amber asked briefly, still ignoring Emir's friends. "Why? Have you wanted to go there for a long time? Really? Not only a tour guide, but also a call girl. I haven't seen all the clients' houses yet." "You haven't." "That's true. You guys don't let anyone in. You're like spiders in a web. But there's always a way out." "And what is your way out?" "I assure you, the gate is like a door to a safe. A flea can't get through. You won't escape, will you?" "There is a way out. I've already escaped through your father's window. I'm not afraid of death. Don't think about chewing through the bars with your teeth." He nodded at her wrist. Something had changed. Almost imperceptibly, but Amber felt it. "Aren't you afraid of anything?" Emir asked. The iron confidence and mockery were gone from his voice. "Why, nothing." Amber spoke in a deliberately harsh tone that she had never spoken before in her life. I'm afraid of the fortress. They say there are ghosts there in droves. They step on each other's toes. I had a friend stay there for a night on a dare and she nearly went mad. I'm not afraid of that lock thing you've got going on. Yet, that's a good idea. One of the guys came to life. It's under reconstruction. None of the people are there. Let's stick her in one of those holes. She'll sit there for a day or two and then we'll take her back. It'll be silk. It's better than if that rabid thing starts gnawing on her own veins. Or your throat. Emir thought for a minute, and then became lively. Come on, let's do it. He had a premonition of unusual entertainment. There was almost nothing left unavailable to him in this world. He was already satiated. But to shake the family history, for his ancestors had put their enemies, or perhaps captives, in those dreadful caves. It was tempting to do as they did. This fool won't run away. Even if there is a small window in such a cave, it is very narrow. You can't fit through it. And if you turn around, you'll find yourself under a cliff. Then all you can do is throw yourself down, just to be sure. And if that crazy woman throws herself down, no one will ever think anything of Emir. It's not the same old story with Dad. The owner could do almost anything, but it took a lot of money to cover up that old story. And here's a careless girl climbing a mountain and getting killed. It's her own fault. But Emir had no doubt the girl would never get out of those underground passages. Jason bought a hunting rifle, according to all the rules, having collected the documents and having a hunting ticket. But it was not worth looking for it afterward in the company of those who wanted to shoot a bird or kill a boar. Afterward, he laundered the trophies. Sharing tales, Jason retreated into the woods. Loneliness had long been his shadow, his second self, and he'd come back without any booty. He had another goal in mind, to preserve his sniper skills and that inner focus that would so easily be lost in the shooting range. Jason needed that inner determination and willingness to pass the point of no return as much as he needed a steady and accurate hand. He would go far away where no other hunters could get to him, and where no one could hear the sound of the shot. Jason would only shoot at a target until he felt he was ready for anything that might come out of his scheme. All these years he'd spent money on himself more than sparingly, royalties set aside. And by the time it was decided it was time, he had enough saved up to buy a black market sniper rifle. If Amber's mother kept an eye on her master's life, not for any particular purpose, more out of caution, she sighed in relief when she heard he was leaving the country. Jason, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was waiting for. Even the strongest enemy has a moment of weakness, a moment when he opens up. He had to wait patiently for that moment, not to miss it. When Amber led him to the closest place to the castle, Jason realized once again that it was useless to look for luck here. The castle was too far away from people and too well protected. It wasn't worth trying to get to someone hidden behind its walls. There were other options to consider: access roads, places in the city where the owner occasionally visited. Jason knew he would wait patiently, that he would lay his life on it and wait. After all, what would happen to himself afterward was of no concern to him. He didn't think about the consequences, and frankly didn't care about them. But he realized how carefully he had to think over every step, so that his life's work would not remain unfinished. At the hotel, he took a room on the second floor with a low-hanging balcony. It wasn't always easy for an outsider to get onto the front of the building, but it wouldn't be a problem for him to get out of here himself if the need arose. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here, so he paid for 2 weeks for now. He'd see how long it would take. He went to the market where Emily had gone on her last day. He needed to get in tune with her. From a common sense point of view, it was inexplicable. But the chance we get often defies all logic. Over the years, the market has become almost unrecognizable. New pavilions and signs have appeared. But this place was revived as early as it is now, although most of the resort visitors were still asleep. Traders were already laying out their goods on the stalls. There had once been merchants in the ancient fortress too, and they had come down every day to set up their shops. Jason remembered that there had been competition then, and he'd been quietly discouraged from taking cucumbers from Peter or apricots from Ahmed. He waters his garden with cesspool waste. Fertilizer, you know you'll want, he was told. But how could one pass by golden curd, velvety pure apricots, purple grapes, or cucumbers just plucked from the bed? It was impossible to think of anything else but the blissful satisfaction of hunger. Now the early customer was welcome, and the first saleswoman grabbed Jason with her chatter in her hands, which were already placing the clear yellow plums on the scales. But as he counted out the money, Jason froze, listening to the conversation of the women next door with their wares. That's how that girl got stolen and taken away in broad daylight. The mother's ready to go to the noose. Yeah, I know that family. The last thing I thought was that they'd be the ones to get into this kind of trouble. Always so quiet, always the first to say hello when they meet. That girl Amber is either 18 or 19 years old. And why her? Well, she's pretty, I'll give her that. How did you find out? The mother, it turns out, kept it a secret from everyone that her girl had a crush on this boy years ago. Now Amber hasn't come home, and the mother's looking for her, because the police are notoriously unreliable. People who saw it all happen, who saw her being dragged into the car, have come forward. But well, if there are witnesses, will the police let it go this time too? So what witnesses? They all got scared, quickly packed up and left. And now they'll have to find them. And the mothers will say it's all a fabrication, said the full-figured shopkeeper, shifting the apricots so carelessly that the soft sides of the apricots were pitted by her fingers. By God, I think I'm going mad. This is medieval. The master is the Lord. It's always been like that in my lifetime. And it will go on my son has grown up there, said another. And what is your mother not afraid to tell now? Isn't it too late for her to realize it? What has she got to lose? The only hope now is that everybody will know about it. Maybe then that scum will be ashamed to go all the way. He'll let her go in the end. After he's played with her, he'll let her go. When did this happen? Jason asked, forgetting about the change the peddler was counting out for him. I found out yesterday, the full-figured woman said. That's the kind of thing we get. You come here like you're in paradise for a vacation, but not everything is so peaceful and quiet. Who can give me the address of this family? Jason asked. Please. Do you want to help one guest? Well, help. They've always lived poor, and Mom's sure going to need the money now. I don't know whether she's at home or in the hospital. How much medicine costs, can you imagine? Tell me the address, I'll remember it. It wasn't 20 minutes before Jason knocked on the gate of the house on the quiet street. The gate was 3 boards, the brown paint peeling off long ago. There was no bell, but even a delicate knock was enough for the unlocked gate to open by itself. Jason followed the path through the garden to the house. 2 women were sitting on the open veranda. One, very old, slouched in a chair with armrests and red eyes. The other, younger, stood toward him, clamping her hands over her mouth, apparently in no doubt what news he had brought. And Jason's heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. It was as if he'd been transported back to the hour he'd learned of Emily's death. Jason raised his palms in a soothing gesture. I didn't bring bad news. I want to learn something and maybe help. But you're not the police, said the younger one, the mother. And there was more affirmation in it than questioning intonation. Jason realized she was already there. Already tried to raise everyone's ears. It didn't work. She'd been told something like, wait, a young girl's been out for 3 days, ran away, decided not to let you know. Now mother and grandmother were hitting this uncertainty like birds against glass. Their hearts were about to fail. I'm not the police, he said, and he could hear the change in his voice. I understand that you know who your Amber is and whose hands, and that this man has had his eye on her for a long time. That is correct. And a picture of your daughter I'd like to see, if I may. The mother shrugged her shoulders shakily. The shawl thrown over them, apparently grabbed from the bed, didn't help. She went quickly into the room and soon returned with a red-bound album, an old album, the kind they used to glue pictures of children from birth many years ago. Her mother opened the album to the last page, stroked the picture of a pretty blonde-haired girl with big, clear eyes. There was nothing of the modern girl in her. She looked like an easy victim who had fallen into the golden hands of Cochet, who would take her wherever he wanted. I'll hire a hitman, mother said. Sell everything we have, this house, everything. And we'll hire someone to kill that rotter at last. Tanya, Grandma raised her voice. The thing to think about right now was how to help Amber. No such thoughts just yet. Mother dropped her head on the table and cried with her grief. That's right, it had all come to pass. It was as if she were standing over Amber's coffin. It was impossible to question her now, and Jason got the story from his grandmother. She, too, had changed in the last 24 hours. If Jason had known her before, he would have seen how she had aged. Now she was an old woman sitting in front of him, immersed in herself, a little crazy. But he didn't know what to say to both of them, because now all he had to do was risk everything. and no one knew what the consequences of his move would be. What can you do for her? Again, it was not the mother who asked, but the grandmother. The mother was still unable to speak coherently. I'll try to find out where she is, and then it will depend on the circumstances. One more question, please. I know this is difficult for you, but I need to know. You know Amber best. If she escaped, where would she go? Would she go back home, or would she try to hide somewhere? Would she run to the police, or would she go far away without saying a word to anyone? Mother raised her head. At these words, she and grandmother exchanged glances. The fortress grandmother said, "It had always been the place dearest to her. A place of strength, as they say. She would run there for comfort, and you can hide there so that no one can find you. It's a veritable underground labyrinth. You know that ancient fortress and the cave city. It's undergoing restoration. But somehow I don't doubt that Amber would run there." Jason closed his eyes a little, signaling that he'd taken note. "Why don't I go there myself?" His mother jumped up. "What if she's really gone and is hiding there?" "I'll go and call." "Don't even think about it," he said sharply. "Nowhere, not a single step now, so as not to hurt your daughter or yourself. Your job is to wait. Do you realize how hard it is to wait and do nothing? Have you ever been through anything like this, been in our shoes?" The last thing Jason would do in his life is tell Amber's grief-stricken relatives about Emily. Because they still had a chance. There was hope. She didn't. She didn't. Amber really knew the underground labyrinths well. Of course, she couldn't go through all of them. Many of the passages were simply blocked, and no one was going to clear them. Cave vaults were crumbling, their corridors becoming impassable. She was risking everything, too. The company she'd fallen into could do anything to her first. There were no witnesses, and then dump her in one of the stone bags to make her go mad. No water, no food, and utter despair. Or even pushed off a cliff. Then again, who would see? But she was just beaten, tastefully, heartily. And then they pushed her into that death chamber that the tour guides liked to scare tourists with. Apparently, Emir and his accomplices did not know these places so well, and this cave was known to everyone. Some said that they could put a prisoner here for decades, setting a completely insane ransom for him. Others said it was the place of execution, and they described in vivid color exactly how. Now, the narrow entrance was closed by an iron grate, but Emir, it turned out, had a key to it. He must have inherited it from his great-grandfather. "This is where you'll sit." Amber was shoved back so hard that she couldn't keep her feet and fell to her knees on the stone floor. "Maybe we'll stop by again tomorrow," Emir smirked, savoring every word and trying to catch the look of horror in her eyes. He didn't wait. "The day after tomorrow, then. We have to bring you water, poor thing. But we'll only give it to you if you ask for it very nicely." "Meet us on your knees with your mouth open," advised one of his buddies. Cheeky. Malnourished, covered in rashes. Amber couldn't let her hatred suffocate her now. Make her do something rash. She walked to the back of the cave, her cell, settled on the stone ledge, wrapped her arms around her knees, and stared out the window. "Are you getting into character?" Kyle Smith wondered. "Like, go ahead and practice with the ghosts until we get there." They left, laughing, deliberately loudly discussing the next time they'd visit her. What would they do to her then? Amber didn't move until her acute hearing stopped picking up the sound of their footsteps and voices. There was the sound of a car pulling away, and then she caught her breath. Amber stood up and walked over to one of the windows cut into the stone. Rough, irregular squares, just enough to let light into the cave and gauge the thickness of the stone walls. The cave was cold, and it would get even colder at night. Amber knew she didn't have much time. Very little. 24 hours, maybe less, and no one would come here in that time. She didn't even doubt that. She couldn't think about her mother and grandmother going crazy at home. The thought of that was mentally distressing. But Amber couldn't suppress the agonizing feeling of thirst. She'd spent the entire day in the heat. She hadn't eaten since this morning. And then there was the worry. She walked slowly around the cave, examining every stone, tapping her fingers on it, but she couldn't see a glimmer of hope anywhere. The cave had been cleaned just for tourists, so that through the iron grating they could see the manicured walls, not the bare stone and ledge that had replaced the prisoner's bench and bed. And there's a rusty piece of iron sticking out. It must have been used to attach a chain, if it was to be put on the prisoner to intimidate him. Night came and brought no relief. Amber's eyes adjusted to the darkness quickly enough. It wasn't complete thanks to the windows. The night was clear, the moonlight walking through the cave from end to end. Amber was cold, but she didn't notice it herself. Her mind, however, seemed ready to boil. She searched again and again for a way out and didn't find it. But far more terrible than the night was the whole of the next day, when, beginning in the morning, she waited every minute for the arrival of her tormentors. She wondered exactly what they had in mind and realized that she had nothing at all, to defend herself. Every sound made her freeze and hold her breath. But they didn't come. Maybe they thought they'd give her a hard time, make her more cooperative. Maybe Kyle was just distracted by other things. By the evening of the second day, the thirst was almost unbearable. Amber thought seriously about the possibility that maybe some moisture would show up on the stone walls at night from the temperature difference and could be licked off with her tongue. There was no way to open the iron grate on the door, no way to dig under it. There was no earth here at all, just rock. The only thing Amber tried was to squeeze through the window. She almost succeeded, but it was the very last step, a desperate move. The only way to get out the window and plummet into the abyss was if there was no other way out and death was preferable. This is my fortress, my place, Amber thought, pressing her forehead against the cold stone. Why the hell can't I do this? Is it really hopeless and these walls won't do anything to help me? She navigated the stars pretty well and fell asleep probably around midnight. But she didn't sleep long, about 2 hours. She woke up when it was starting to get light. It was nearing dawn. But the windows of the cave faced north, and it was still dark, though in the east the sky must have already turned blue. At first she thought she was dreaming, because it couldn't be. In the corner of the cave, in the darkest corner of the cave, stood a girl. She was probably about 10 or 12 years old. Fragile, thin, as if she were just bones, wearing a floor-length cherry dress that seemed to glow slightly. The girl's hair was braided and she wore a cap like a bonnet on her head. Amber began blinking frequently and even clenched her eyelids, because it couldn't be anything other than hallucinations from nerves and dehydration. The girl walked over to her. Amber realized that if it wasn't a vision of her inflamed brain, she was facing a ghost. But the little visitor was not transparent, only very pale. She picked up a pitcher, and a pitcher she happened to have, and gave Amber a drink. Never afterward could Amber forget drinking that strange water, or rather the mist that flowed from the jug. But it quenched thirst, and more than that. It gave her strength back. Shinika, Amber asked quietly, "Is that you?" The girl blinked, just as Amber had done before. She was very small, very sad, and lonely to the point of heartbreak. Maybe it had been centuries since she'd had anyone to visit her, no one to fetch water for her. With inaudible steps, the girl went to the wall and lay down on the very iron that was sticking out of the stone. Nothing happened, but Amber understood her perfectly. 2 steps were enough for her to get next to the piece of metal and do what the little guest had done, lean on it with her chest and arms. The slit that opened in the wall was so narrow it looked like a trap. Step into it, and it would crush you. The girl was no longer behind Amber, but in front of her, somewhere in the dark depths, and there was a faint glow coming from it. And the girl didn't hesitate any longer. She stepped into the cramped corridor and walked, not even walked squeezed between the walls. Sometimes she had to make an effort to move on. And if something happened here, no one would ever find her. She realized that clearly. Enthusiasm gradually waned. She was going down somewhere, and the way went on endlessly. She seemed forbidden to think about anything. She had to keep going as long as she had the strength. And then, too inwardly, she tuned in to the fact that she would fall in the end. And maybe that wouldn't be the worst outcome. So she was startled to the core when suddenly there was a whiff of fresh night air, and they found themselves in a small cave-like alcove at the very foot of the mountain. They had climbed out. There was the trail that ran down from the fortress. Amber looked around in panic, searching for the girl with her gaze, but no one was near her anymore. Only there, somewhere up on the slope where the girl's grave was, a light flashed for a moment and then went out. Or maybe it was just a star falling. By the end of that first day after Amber's disappearance, Jason knew the license plate numbers of the cars that belonged to the owner's family and his cronies. Amber could have been kept in a castle, most likely where it was even more convenient to hide loose ends, and in case of such a need, literally. And yet there was still some chance that she'd been handled differently, that she was hidden somewhere, and that chance couldn't be dismissed. Jason waited. He had managed to get much closer to the castle unnoticed than Amber had led on. He was almost beside the road, and only a keen eye would have recognized him in the green thicket. The sniper rifle was with him, and he would be in trouble if one of his master's men had spotted him. There was no other way to interpret his behavior than ambush and hunt. It wasn't the eagles he'd chosen to hunt. Jason didn't know how long he'd be here before he learned something, got a clue. But he hadn't left here yet in the late afternoon, and it was already clear that he was going to spend the night. Jason fell asleep with his head resting on the damp forest floor. His hearing was keen, and it was unlikely that anyone would be able to approach him undetected. Jason had no idea that at some point his sleep would become so sound that it would transport him to another dimension, where what he saw was real. He saw a country and a girl, as if coming from the depths of time. The clothing had a purple hue that made it impossible to distinguish the gender in the darkness. It was something like a long dress, the kind you see in ethnographic museums. The girl stepped back, giving him a view of the cave, and there was Amber, sitting on a stone ledge. The panorama shifted, as if a movie camera had decided to film the background. Now the ancient fortress lay before him like a palm of his hand, and it was there that the cave was. The prisoners were in it. He himself looked at it all, lying on the mountainside with a rifle in his hands. It was early morning. A black Jeep was driving down the road below. Jason was awake before dawn had even broken. There was no fatigue, no heaviness in his head. On the contrary, he knew exactly what to do now. He didn't have to decide what was going to happen next. It was as if everything had been decided for him. Children are not responsible for their fathers, but sometimes it is clear from the very beginning that they will surpass them. And would a bullet between the eyes be punishment enough for the master? Suffering measured in moments. But to mourn the flesh of his flesh, the one he nurtured and raised to replace him, it would take years and end with life. It was getting light when Jason reached the town where he'd started on his way to the fortress. It took him another half hour or so to climb up to the ruins of the fortress, and then climbing higher to the top to take the place he had seen in his dream. Now the whole road lay before him. Anyone approaching he would see from a distance, and he would have time to take aim. He didn't even make an attempt to find Amber. A different task now faced him. Logically speaking, the owner's son couldn't have gotten here this early. Jason had to cover his eyes to bring his image back to life. Tall, with a fresh, plump face, large lips, clenched fists. A fortunate man who had never known hard work, but was used to taking down the defenseless. So used to it that he didn't even expect his victims to resent him. Only fear was on the faces raised to him in supplication. For a moment, feelings came over Jason. Such mental strife. He lowered his head and breathed evenly to keep from throwing up. Emir couldn't have gotten here earlier, because that fat turkey would probably be asleep before lunch. But Jason had seen his car against the dawn sky in a brief vision, and now he waited. When the murmur of an engine was heard in the distance, all he had to do was move the barrel of his rifle. He was no longer a man, he had become a fearless machine, and all the measurements, calculations were going on as if outside his consciousness. He did not even try to hit the darkened windows of the Jeep. The shot hit the tire. And that was enough. Afterward, Jason stood full length on the mountain, a black silhouette against the dawn sky, and stared at the car that had gone down, flipped over, rolled over twice hard, and finally burst into a tall fire. He had a little time. He knew that the fire would be visible from afar, that it would not be long before people would be rushing here. But he did not try to hide now, even though he should have covered his tracks as soon as possible. He walked toward the fortress because he knew it was the right thing to do. And he was not surprised when he saw the figure of a girl in the distance. She froze, and then slowly began to rise toward him. He had better not meet her, because if he didn't get one chance for luck, they would look for him on the ground and underground. They'd dig deep and they'd find him eventually. He couldn't let anyone suggest that Amber's fate had anything to do with him. Jason had his own reason for revenge, and more than a good one. He didn't believe that the dead forgave everything and everyone, that they didn't care about earthly matters. Jason thought that Amelie was only now truly at peace. He also knew that everything he'd signed up for, sending the car into the abyss, was justified, and that no matter what happened to himself, it was okay, because that girl was alive and would live, and no one would ever hurt her again. and he'd only go near her for a minute to make sure she was safe. Amber was already standing 2 feet away from him, and yes, she was in one piece, but there was blood on her cheek and hair. Jason held out his hand as if asking, "What is it?" "He is, isn't he?" Amber asked, pointing at the chasm. The man nodded. Then she unclenched her palm, which held the ruby earring torn from her ear. Amber wanted to throw it into the chasm too, but the earring flew a few feet away and disappeared into the dry grass. Catherine chose a less crowded checkout and joined the queue. A little uncomfortable in the supermarket to stand with a basket where there is only half a bread and a packet of dumplings, because most people roll carts filled to the top of the products. What can you do? They are happy that there was money for it today. She stood at the counter with oil and mayonnaise. She had to put something on her dumplings. The cheapest ones she usually picked up weren't there today for some reason. All right, she and Jerry would have enough of that today. Yeah, they'd be happy with what they had. Maybe one day she'd have the money, and she'd buy whatever she wanted from the shop too. What the child needs, that's for sure. Jerry looks so small for his 10 years, so pale. No wonder life hadn't spoiled him from birth. And neither had Catherine. Maybe it would be more convenient to go to a small shop for such minor purchases, but everything is more expensive there. And in the supermarket there are always promotions. There is an opportunity to save a little. It's essential when there's nothing to save. So she goes here, hunting for promotions and discounts, no longer paying attention to the contemptuous glances at her basket, in which lonely dangles something cheapest. Why should she be ashamed? Yes, she is a poor orphan from an orphanage. She lost her job and can't find a new one yet. And if someone is ashamed, what can you do? She was not ashamed and did not know that she had long been noticed by the shop administrator, who had his own plans, not the most, let's say, honorable. But he knew how to justify himself. The thing is that they have recently become very bad in their shop with workers, cleaners, loaders, and he, the administrator, is responsible for everything, as if these workers are in his pocket. What will he do if people quit? The time is such, the workers have become willful. No one can be forced to work. It was good 5 years ago. If you take someone, the person is happy that he found a permanent job, and he works quietly, and he is grateful. But now everyone is literate. They know their rights. You can't say a word to anyone. It starts right away. Here I am to work here for your pennies. Yes, I have residence registration. Yes, I have experience. They have experience. They've got experience. And the main thing is, where will they go? To another shop with the same salary. It's like they're doing it on purpose to ruin Bruce's life. They're going to ask him later on, 'cause he can't scrub the floors himself. So he figured out a way to find temporary help. He noticed this girl, almost childlike in appearance, a long time ago. She comes in, buys some rubbish. Clearly, she's got no money. What use could she be? A very simple one. You can accuse her of stealing, scare her properly and say that so-and-so, they'll close the case. But only she will have to work, to do what they tell her to do. Beneficial for all parties, and the work will be done, and she does not need to pay money. The salary will be, but it will go not to this poor woman in his pocket. Of course, he would have to share it with the guard because he couldn't do it alone. And then, noticing that a woman had entered the shop, he quickly approached the guard and warned him that he would soon need to arrest a thief. The guard was aware of the matter and nodded understandingly. They had done this sort of thing many times before and had nothing against extra money. And it was good for everyone, including this poor woman, so that she wouldn't starve to death. They could give her some overdue money. The woman for such an operation was the most suitable, with a handbag. Of course, she didn't have a plastic bag for groceries. I guess she couldn't afford to buy one every time. So she walked around the shop with an ordinary bag and a purse, of course, without any clasp. Passing by her, it was a matter of a second to discreetly drop a packet of expensive butter into this bag. But butter alone, of course, was a bit of a long shot. And then Bruce put a jar of red caviar in there too. Now I think we're looking at a felony. The main thing is that the security guard did not fail and detain the thief. Order's schemes were worked out. and in a minute the customer was already clapping her eyes fearfully, and the guard called the administrator. "Here, Bruce, admire. I've caught another one," and to avert his eyes he said, "She stole the bread, and for dessert she had butter and caviar, and even chose the most expensive one. People have no conscience at all." Very naturally indignant was the one who was obliged to guard the shop from thieves. "What are you doing?" exclaimed the woman, and tears streamed from her voice. "What do you allow yourself? I didn't take anything. I don't know how it got in my bag." "I don't know either. I've never seen our groceries jump into anyone's pockets or bags," the receptionist said sternly. "And I take it you couldn't pay for these purchases." "No, so I wasn't going to take them. I only took this one. And why the other was in the bag, I do not know." Catherine was shedding tears. "The artiste. She doesn't know." The security guard was indignant. "The police should be called. Let them sort it out. I see her in our shop almost every day, and she probably carries something every day. And then the whole staff will have to pay for it. It's like we have huge salaries every time they calculate and calculate. Soon we'll be working for them, for these thieves." Other shoppers passed by this small group, looking at the woman, some with judgment, some with sympathy. But no one was going to intercede. And suddenly one man, quite young and handsome, decided to interrupt the unpleasant scene. "Men, maybe stop hurting the girl. You can see she's crying." "Yes, we all have such crybabies dragging." "Go already, citizen, do not interfere," waved away the guard. "Yes, I'll go away. I'll go away and take the girl. What did she steal from you there? Show me. For such nonsense you've made a trial here. I'll pay the fine for her. I'll pay the fine." "How much?" The man pulled out his wallet. Apparently, the receptionist and the guard didn't want to make too much noise either. So without any pleasure, they took some sum and let the girl and her defender go. They were not happy, of course, because the plan had gone awry. But what can you do? Stories like that happen. "Thank you so much," Catherine sobbed. "Thank you for helping me out. But the thing is, I really didn't take anything, you know. They must have slipped it to me themselves." "I believe you. Does it happen that they do that?" "Yeah, forget it. But I see you're in financial difficulties, aren't you?" "Yes, but it's only temporary. We've had one company where I used to work close down, and I can't find another job yet, but I'm sure I will, and everything will be all right," Catherine assured her. "In the meantime, I'm getting by without stealing." "I'm sure you are. But, by the way, before you find a job, I have a suggestion for you. I need you to do a small task. It's only a day's work, and I'll pay you well for it." "What do you have to do?" Catherine perked up. She had nothing against work, but still there were some doubts. How to know what this man would offer, and she didn't know much. But the man hastened to reassure her. "What is required is a trifle, to be honest. I've had a misfortune. An acquaintance of mine died, a lonely man, but a good man, and I need some lady to well, in this case you to play the part of his bride at his funeral." "How so?" Catherine didn't understand. "And why?" "Just don't be alarmed. I seem to be explaining it wrong. It's really not difficult at all. I mean, you won't even have to do anything. But I needed to make people around me realize that my friend didn't die alone. You know, 6 months before he died, he divorced his wife and couldn't love anyone else. So I want his wife to know that he wasn't alone. You're young, you're pretty. You're not even known to anyone around him. I don't think you'd have a problem with that. And I don't see the slightest reason not to, because I'll really pay you. I'll pay you well too." "But that would be cheating," Catherine stretched out doubtfully. "And anyway, it's kind of embarrassing. I don't really know anyone there, and they don't know me. And I didn't know the deceased at all either. How am I going to go there?" She glanced at her clothes. "I don't even have any mourning clothes. No one will believe I was someone's fiancé." "Ah, yes, it's all small things. All the things you say are nothing. About the deception, it's good intent. Thanks to you, the deceased will not be thought of as a lonely, abandoned man, but as an accomplished man who had a personal joy at the end of his life, after all. Well, about mourning, it's simple. We'll literally go and buy you a suitable outfit, which of course will be left to you, apart from the service charge. At the funeral itself? No, I don't require you to be there sobbing, banging your head, kissing the dead man's hands or feet at all. That's absolutely unnecessary. Just cry and stand there with a mournful face. It's not hard. The ceremony will be touching. Catherine thought a moment and agreed. She wasn't really losing anything. To attend the funeral, that's all. The money this man promised wasn't bad, and really not for a difficult job, but for a simple matter. And she needs money now, because she has to take care not only of herself, but also of the boy, who will be lost without her. Although this child is not her brother, and not a relative at all, if you do not consider all orphanages as relatives. Shortly before she was to graduate from the orphanage, she took the patronage, a paper over the boy Jerry. I helped him do his homework, stood up for him if he was offended, watched his appearance. When I graduated, I promised not to forget and visit him at least once in a while. But I had no time, because I had to solve my own problems. Like all orphans, after graduation she was given a place to live, but not a new flat in a nice house, but a room in a hotel-type dormitory. She studied, got a profession, got a job, and already thought that everything would go well for her. But when she once again came to visit Jerry, she was shocked by the news he ran away. Catherine was very concerned. But where to find the boy? She had no idea, and they met by chance. After about 6 months, he was wandering the street, begging and probably stealing a bit of change now and then. Jerry, how could you do that? Why did you do this? You promised that everything would be all right, Catherine was saying, and she brought the boy to her house. As if you don't know yourself what it's like to live there in that orphanage. I don't want to stay there. If you take me back, I'll think you're a traitor. And I'll run away myself anyway, the boy replied stubbornly. Come on, I'm not going to take you anywhere. But I won't let you hang around the streets either. Stay at my place then. 'Cause if you're on the streets, you're going to be a criminal. Like you don't know what happens to all of us. Catherine really knew how easy it was for orphans to fall into crime and then end up in prison. She didn't want that fate for Jerry. She knew he was a good guy, though not with everyone. Well, I'll stay with you, just so no one knows anything. Because if they find out, they'll send me back, he said seriously. Catherine agreed and decided that she would try to get custody of Jerry. Then he could go to school with good reason. That is, to live a completely normal life, openly like all people. However, these plans were not destined to come true. Very soon she lost her job, that is, she was left with no money at all. There was no question of custody. The only thing she was able to do was to scrape together a few odd jobs to feed Jerry and herself, so she could use the extra money. At least she'd save something for herself and the baby. The new acquaintance, who called himself David, didn't lie. He took her to the shop, where he bought her a black silk dress, a small purse, patent-heeled shoes, black lace scarf, everything necessary for the image of a grieving bride. When Catherine changed, he aghast. It turned out that the girl is miraculously good, even without makeup. Black lace favorably shaded her porcelain skin, emphasizing its purity and freshness, and the dress fitted her figure perfectly. You, Catherine, are really the bride of any millionaire, exclaimed the man. Catherine looked in the mirror, a little embarrassed, but mentally agreed with him. She really hadn't expected to be like this herself. Catherine, this is how you should always be, David said enthusiastically. When they left the shop, Catherine had already changed into her usual clothes and became an ordinary, poor and not very happy girl again. Don't you wish you could always be pretty, confident, well-dressed? Maybe someday, Catherine agreed modestly. There are no such opportunities right now. For that matter, she wasn't sure there ever would be such opportunities. Nothing was working out for her. But being frank about it with an outsider was not something she wanted to do. Especially since his speeches after he had seen her as a beauty had displeased Catherine very much. She knew very well what dangers might befall pretty girls from meeting rich men. You better tell me, when and where should I approach to play this part? By yourself. I'll give you the money now. You need to buy flowers too, and then come by taxi. Here's a card with the address on it. Go to the cemetery, and you'll see it. On the appointed day and hour, she arrived at the place where the farewell to the deceased was to take place. There were many people. Catherine naturally knew no one. No one knew her either, at least at first. That was exactly what she had hoped. When everyone noticed, there was a whisper through the crowd. Everyone was wondering who the pretty girl with the bouquet of burgundy roses was. David had made sure she was recognized as the bride of the deceased. But as it turned out, among the crowd was a man who knew Catherine from a completely different side. And it was the same Bruce, the shop administrator. The deceased had quite a wide circle of acquaintances, and it was no surprise that this man who wanted to set Catherine up ended up there too. At first he, like everyone else, admired the beauty of the mourner, but looking closer, he recognized her as the one he had recently accused of stealing. He was well aware that a few days ago this same bride, dressed in rags, had been weeping bitterly at the till in his shop. He could have kept silent about it, but he was too angry with the girl, and with the man who had saved her. So soon there was a whisper in the grieving crowd that the bride was not who she said she was. Eventually someone, apparently one of the funeral directors, approached her and hissed in her ear. "Have you no shame? This is a funeral after all, and you're making a spectacle of yourselves here. I don't know what the purpose is, but it's disgusting." Under the judgmental glances, Catherine shrank back and ran away, crying quite sincerely. She was hurt that she was in such a position, and how David had not thought of the fact that she might be recognized. She didn't run from the cemetery, but sat down near the exit. It was inconvenient to go outside. Here in the cemetery grounds in black silks and lace, crying, she still looked quite natural. But now Catherine noticed that the people who had attended that funeral were coming out, talking and sighing, getting into their cars and buses, apparently going to the wake. She waited until everyone had gone, got up and walked back to the grave. Only now Catherine realized that the bouquet of roses still held in her hands, and in general wanted for some reason to apologize to the deceased, about whom she wanted to create a false impression. Something was pulling her to that grave. She came to a fresh mound already strewn with flowers and wreaths, and placed her bouquet on it. She looked at the large photograph of the deceased. Indeed, it was a handsome young man, and she burst into tears. She felt so sorry for the deceased that she could not hold back her tears. Catherine knelt down next to the mound and sincerely mourned the deceased. Suddenly she heard strange sounds like banging and screaming. With horror she realized that they were coming from underground. Catherine did not immediately believe in the reality of what was happening. Leaning down to the very ground, she shouted, "Are you alive?" Inaudible screams and moans came from the ground again. "Hold on. I'll set you free now. Now, just a minute, just don't scream. We must save the air." And she rushed to the exit of the cemetery. She remembered that there was a gatehouse there, where the minister was probably. If he was still there, she could ask him for help. She ran up to the gatehouse, relieved to see that the light was still on, and knocked on the door. A disgruntled elderly man opened. "What is it? Why are you drumming?" he asked unhappily. "Hurry up and come with me," Catherine shouted. "There's a living man buried there. He's screaming from under the ground. I heard it. We must save him." "Well, here's more news. What did you hear there? Nobody was buried there alive. Go home," said the watchman, who had evidently had to deal with the effect of grief on people before. "No, really, I swear to you. Come on, give me a spade at least. I'll dig it out myself. You can't leave a living man in a grave, honestly," begged Catherine. "Damn you. Don't you realize there's no such thing? All right, don't shout. Come, I'll listen. But look, if you lie, I beg you, take a spade with you and give me one too. I'll dig too. We must hurry or he'll run out of air." Catherine realized that the minister probably believed her and would go with her. That was a little encouraging. Whether he believed it was unknown, but he took the shovel and gave Catherine one as well. "Well, let's go. Let's go. It's a shame people have already left. Would have made the people laugh. Well, look, if there's nothing there. Yes, of course, beat all you like with your shovel, only it's all true." Catherine shouted and ran to the grave. "Quick, I'll show you where it is." It was difficult for the elderly man to keep up with the girl, and she had to stop now and then to wait for him. But then she shouted, pointing with her hand, "Look, there's a fresh grave over there. Go to it, and I'll get started." She ran up to the grave, began hurriedly throwing down flowers and wreaths, freeing the earth, and encouraged the one who continued to shout deafeningly from beneath the ground. "Now, in a minute you will be rescued. Just don't worry." The minister who had arrived also heard these sounds and began to work vigorously with his shovel. He was much faster and more skillful than Catherine, who could not dig. "You're picking the earth like porridge with a spoon," he said to her. "If you can't do it, don't do it. Call an ambulance. Do you have a phone?" Catherine was confused. "Ah, here, take mine." Catherine dialed the number, confusedly explaining what was wrong. Meanwhile, the watchman made quick work of the soft, still unsettled ground, jumped down, opened the coffin, which indeed contained a living person. An ambulance soon arrived. The victim, who, according to the plaque on the grave, was called Oliver, was taken to the hospital. Catherine wanted to go with him, but the doctors wouldn't take her. "What are you going to do there?" "There's poisoning here. I guess this site is not for everyone," the doctor replied. "Don't worry, you'll be told everything. Then you'll have to go in for questioning yourself, if you know the man." And that's exactly what I'm not familiar with, Catherine thought as she walked towards the cemetery exit. And they won't let me know anything. But maybe that's for the best. Why do I need the extra worry and trouble that will surely come from what's going on? Once in the hands of the doctors, Oliver began to regain consciousness rather quickly. At first, waking up in the grave, he didn't realize what was going on for a long time. The doctor explained that he had probably been intended to be poisoned, but had miscalculated the dose. "Tomorrow the investigator will come. Explain to him who it was who disliked you so much. There's no threat to your health now, but you'll have to stay under the drip." It was no secret to Oliver who wanted to poison him, his ex-wife Joyce. They had divorced 6 months ago, and she, knowing that her ex-husband was a wealthy man, had tried to get more in the divorce. And she sort of succeeded. But Joyce was the kind of woman who couldn't get enough. All the more so because, having split up with Oliver, she hadn't found a wealthy husband. On the contrary, she'd fallen in love with a young, hot, handsome man who demanded money from her. And then Joyce learnt that Oliver had made several successful deals that brought him money. She was eager to get her hands on them. But how? She hadn't been married for a long time. But if she could eliminate this ex, anything would be possible. So the enterprising woman invited Oliver in for an important conversation. He thought the ex-wife had some kind of paperwork problem. Came and even agreed to drink a cup of coffee, after which he lost consciousness. Woke up only in the coffin. He told about it to the investigator who came. But, as it turned out, Joyce even earlier learnt about the rescue of her ex-husband and fled. Now she was to be searched for. Oliver was visited by friends who had attended his funeral not so long ago. He was only interested in one thing, who the stranger who had saved him was. Unknown. Some pretty girl. Never seen her before. I think David knew her, or Bruce. We never realized, was all the acquaintances could answer. Oliver tried to ask David, but he suddenly shut up and wouldn't answer. He confessed that he had hired a girl to be his date for the evening, but he didn't know who she was or where she lived. Oliver was not in the habit of backing down and eventually found her. It was not so difficult. After all, this girl saw not only those who attended the funeral, but also the ambulance doctors and the investigator. That's why one day Catherine was called out on the street by name by a nice young man in whom she recognized the man she had saved. "Have you recovered?" she smiled. "I'm very happy for you." "I am so glad," he replied with a broad smile. "And how grateful to you. For it is thanks to you that I am alive." "Not at all." Catherine was embarrassed. "That's just the way it is. So I thought I'd meet you, to show my gratitude." "How can I ever thank you?" Oliver asked, already serious. Catherine was dressed more than modestly now. It was immediately obvious that she was in need, although even her modest appearance did not hide the beauty of her face and figure. However, she was not going to ask for anything. She began to refuse gratitude, because she did not do it for profit. But Oliver was not going to back down. Understand, I can't just forget what happened. Don't make me feel ungrateful. At least let me invite you to the cafe. Catherine did not object to this. Besides, she was curious to know how it had happened that Oliver had been buried alive. That was what she asked when they sat down at a table in the cozy cafe. The man explained that it had happened at the behest of his ex-wife. "What a horror," Catherine said. "Has she even been apprehended?" "Where is she?" "My ex is on the run, but I think they'll find her. It's not that significant now, though. Still, I want to know what I can do for you, Catherine. Don't be embarrassed and don't say no. I have money. I have connections. Perhaps I could solve some of your problems." And Catherine made up her mind and told him about her main difficulty, that is, about Jerry, for whom she had taken responsibility but could not formalize him. "What if you could help somehow with your connections?" she asked timidly. "How unselfish you are," Oliver marveled. "Asking not for yourself, but for a child who is not even your own. Don't you want anything yourself?" "That's exactly what I need. I do love Jerry like a brother. He relies on me for everything, and there's nothing I can do. Besides, for me too, because I'm keeping him with me now, and it's illegal. Digging me out of the ground probably wasn't very legal either. Okay, jokes aside, I'll be sure to do what I can. Let's meet tomorrow for that. You bring me all your and Jerry's papers, and hopefully we'll get this matter resolved. And please think about everything else too. It seems to me that you and your ward have enough problems besides this." "So what does this have to do with my problems? Even if I have them, that doesn't mean you have to solve them. You probably have enough of your own now." "Okay, if we're meeting tomorrow, I hope you'll think of something you need specifically. You have to think about yourself, not just others," Oliver said. And he began to reflect. "Now I see why David didn't want to tell me about her. Not only is she beautiful, but she's completely selfless, a rare thing these days. I'm surprised he hasn't started courting her. I mean, he seems to be single now. How was he to know that David was trying to court Catherine? After all, he'd seen how charming she was, and would be even more beautiful if she were dressed well. But his advances had not been successful. The girl, who might have been frightened away by the circumstances under which they met, shunned him. David seemed sincere in offering to help her, but apparently he did so clumsily that he gave no reason for the moral girl to trust him completely. Oliver seemed to act more skillfully, so after the rescue conversation, Catherine walked home encouraged. Perhaps their problem with Jerry would soon be solved, and then Catherine would become his guardian, which meant the boy wouldn't have to worry about being taken back to the orphanage. It didn't even upset her very much that they had almost no money, and tonight they would have to share only a few potatoes for dinner, and of tea and bread for breakfast. But that it would be possible to ask for money from a savior who was offering it himself, she had not even thought of. Oliver himself, apparently not wanting to hurt the ego of this proud girl, the next day came with a large bag from the supermarket. Taking Catherine's documents, he handed her the purchases, and without listening to her objections, jumped into the car and drove away. The girl returned home, discouraged, embarrassed, but happy. What was in the bag, she and Jerry enough for more than one day. Oliver hadn't been deceptive in the main. It was unclear what connections he'd made, but the custody issue had been resolved favorably. Catherine couldn't hold back her tears of gratitude when she learnt that at least she wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. The fact that Oliver had suddenly embraced her and kissed her didn't seem like too much of a liberty. She was glad to return the kiss, and not just in gratitude for solving the problem. In that moment, she truly loved Oliver, the only person who had helped her so much without asking. She'd never felt anyone's protection or patronage in her life, and she'd only dreamed of having someone to lean on. Yes, David had met her a few times, offered to be a couple, and could probably help her too. But she didn't feel like accepting help from him. Why couldn't she go to him and ask for help with her and Jerry's problems? And it was as if he himself had no idea, waiting for the requests, not realizing that she could not address them. Catherine dreamed of a man not only strong, but also understanding. And now the dream seemed to be coming true. No wonder the girl felt doubly happy. Oliver also realized that he had feelings for the girl who, despite her poverty and helplessness, never asked anyone for anything. Such a fragile, defenseless wanted to hide from all the troubles, which in her life was a lot. From that day on they began to meet, though not as often as they would have liked. After all, he was busy at work. Business demanded a lot of time. But any free minute Oliver devoted to Catherine, trying to somehow improve her life. She thought that she finally smiled at happiness. But it was short-lived. Beloved began to come less often just handed her a bag of groceries and left. And his look was not very satisfied. And stopped appearing at all. Catherine waited a week, 2 weeks, and then she couldn't stand it any longer and rang. "Oliver, hi. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Why did you stop coming round and don't even call?" she asked. "What's wrong? Is there some kind of problem again?" he asked coldly. He, a fickle man, was not at all bothered by this call. Oliver had already forgotten the horror he had recently experienced, and from which Catherine had saved him. He was really tired of solving her problems and helping her. If Catherine has nothing to do and is willing to patronize everyone, then I don't have to patronize her, he finally decided. Especially since Oliver had a new crush, the beautiful model Kelly, with whom he planned to go to an expensive resort. He hoped that Catherine would realize everything and wouldn't bother him again. And then all of a sudden this phone call. "Yeah, well, I missed you," was all Catherine said. "Don't you have anything else to do but miss me?" Oliver replied, already irritated. I, on the other hand, have a ton of things to do, or did you seriously think I was going to spend the rest of my life babysitting you? You're of legal age, I think. And anyway, I'm going away for a while. So, sorry, no time. That was the end of the conversation. Catherine realized everything. She was fed up with the man she trusted. And once again, she was alone, without support and help. Well, she's not used to it. I probably need to get over the failure and live on, relying only on herself. There were enough problems as it was. And the main one was how to support their small family. So it was necessary to get a permanent job as soon as possible. Catherine had no time to choose. She went to the first place she got, a cleaner in some office. There was no thought of looking for a rich patron. She'd had enough of hoping for rich men. It leads to nothing but disappointment. They may be of some help, but nothing more. They're not her kin. And there's nothing to think of someone staying with her forever. She's just a poor orphanage girl. And now she's a cleaning lady. So there's no way any wealthy man is going to take her seriously. And she worked diligently, even rejoicing in the fact that she, a gray mouse with a mop, no one pays attention to her. And people really did not pay attention, to such an extent that they discussed any questions in front of her, not even thinking that the cleaner could hear something there. If she did, what would she realize? Catherine didn't listen, nor did she try to understand anything. Why should she? But one day, in some animated and nervous conversation, a familiar surname flashed. Yeah. And if it wasn't for that creep David Johnson's, we'd be fine. This is the second time he's ruined everything for us. The bastard. I've been saying for a long time we should take him out. Isn't it hard to make an accident or put a brick on his head? Catherine froze in horror for a second. Although she and David Johnson's did not work out, and she was even slightly offended at this man for his persistent advances, still he did not do anything bad to her. But maybe this isn't about him. Johnsons aren't such a rare surname. As the conversation continued, however, she was convinced it was David. You're very brave. It's not hard to set things up where they don't need to be. But it won't be much fun to go to jail afterwards. They poisoned Johnson's mate last year. But he wasn't poisoned. He was alive and well. But they found his wife. She's in the detention center waiting for trial. What good will it do us to nail him? We need to squeeze his business, and the case is over. And you can do it very easily, without any risk to yourself. But what about it? Well, you have to spend a few years in the zone. At this, the discussion moved on to another office. And Catherine, having finished her business, hurried home. She decided that she should warn David. After all, he had helped her out in the shop. And she hadn't seen anything bad from him after that. She just had to find his phone number. Only how? If she'd thrown it away carelessly and David was in serious trouble. Catherine did not find David's number, and then decided the next day to meet him after work. when he would leave the office. But she waited for the picture she was so anxious to avoid, David being led out of the office in handcuffs. "What is this?" "Why? I mean, it's not true," she exclaimed involuntarily, but no one listened to her. A few of David's co-workers who had come out of the office were conversing, some with sympathy, some with horror. Is it really believable that David would kill Matthew? It can't be possible. He trusted him so much, he didn't make him his deputy for nothing. They've known each other since they were kids. Oh, what a lot of things happen in life. He's been arguing with Matthew a lot lately. Yeah, well, Matthew had blood all over the house, signs of a fight. He was young. Was he killed? You better think about what's going to happen to us. We haven't received our last month's wages, and now we'll have to look for work. We can wait for that. I think someone from Canada wants to buy the firm. What do we care who we work for? Catherine felt her legs give out. Didn't make it. The intruders proved more cautious and quicker after all. That David had killed someone she couldn't believe. Is he really going to be sent to prison now? Tears came to her eyes. And what was strange was that she suddenly felt sick. I felt dizzy and wanted to lie down or at least sit down. When she reached the bench, she sank down, trying to breathe deeply and not understanding why she felt so bad. It was only by collating some dates that Catherine realized what was wrong. It seemed she was expecting a baby. The father, of course, was Oliver, from whom she hadn't heard from in a month. But that wasn't what worried her now, it was David's fate. She might be the only one who knew he was innocent, except she couldn't prove it. That conversation had been overheard. She didn't record it, which means it's not proof. Well, she'll be smarter next time. Thanks to Oliver, he'd given her a good phone that could be used both as a recorder and a video camera. Now she would keep a closer eye on her employer, recording anything that seemed suspicious if possible. Of course, she has to be careful. If someone notices her manipulations, everything could turn against her. This, fortunately, did not happen. Catherine acted very carefully. In addition, very soon made a discovery that changed the course of the case. When she arrived at the office and prepared herself a little more carefully than usual, that is, switching on the phone and writing down everything that could save David, she heard from the office exactly what she wanted most of all. "Matthew, you're out of your mind. You're dead. I almost lost my life, not in a grave, but in a hotel, in complete comfort. And you're not only walking the streets, you've come here. Come on, who would recognize me?" Changed as much as I could, David's former deputy hummed. By the way, Catherine had seen him several times before, and now noticed through the open door that he had indeed changed his appearance as much as he could. Now dyed his hair, grew a beard and mustache. But there was nothing he could do about his stocky figure and his distinctive voice. They could easily recognize him. Even if you dressed as a woman, they'd recognize you. Why should I sit in this hotel all my life? I am an active, mobile person. I can't sit in a confined space. Don't whine, you'd better sit a little longer. That's how it is. She'll get herself a company now, and then go wherever you want. These people, you can't rely on anyone. And what are you doing here? The chief shouted at Catherine. Cleaning? There's nothing to clean here. You'll come back later. Can't you see I'm in a meeting? And pushed the cleaner out of the reception area. But Catherine was satisfied. She had managed to write down enough for David to be acquitted. With that, she went to the police to amend David Johnson's case. Since his victim was alive, there was nothing to charge him with. But he wasn't released right away. The investigators had to look into it first. He knew why his case took a new turn and eventually fell apart. Once out, he hurried to meet Catherine. There you go. Catherine, how can you not believe in fate here? The first time we met, I acquitted you. And now you have done me a far more substantial favor. Thank you so much. I don't ask how I can repay you for it, knowing you'll give up everything, especially since you're doing well with your personal life, as I understand it. Very well. I've got custody of Jerry, he's in school studying, and I'm working. Well, I mean, I've been working. Now I'll probably have to look for a new one. So all in all, it's fine, she replied. Good. Oh, and Oliver, how come you and him aren't together? No, he separated. Anyway, don't think I was helping you for any reason of my own. I just happened to hear that you were in big trouble. I couldn't keep my mouth shut about it. I hope you'll be all right now. I wish that from the bottom of my heart. Catherine turned around, intending to leave. She thought their conversation was over, though she was sad to part. It seemed she had made a mistake in favoring Oliver. Yes, David might not be as adept at courtship, but he was clearly more reliable. This she suddenly realized, having gained a new experience and feeling like a muckler. Yes, her child had not yet been born, but she already understood a lot of things much better than 6 months ago, when she was just a girl with no experience with men. And now all was lost to her. She realized that Oliver was unlikely to come back, even with the news of her pregnancy, so she called him. He had to know he was going to be a father. There wasn't much left to feel for him. And after the way he'd reacted to her news, her former love had been replaced by contempt. All he offered was to give her money for the termination, which of course she wasn't going to do. Well, then I don't know why you want this baby. So it's not up to you to decide. Don't you realize that I already have another one? This was how the man she'd come to love, the man she'd come to believe in, treated her. David, why and who needs her now? With another man's baby under her heart, and at home waiting for her another almost teenager, which Catherine also did not intend to leave. Who'd want her with all that baggage? It would be good if she got a job so she could get maternity pay and not lose custody of Jerry. So she was sure she was breaking up with David for good, and there was no one to blame for that. David, fresh out of the holding cell, didn't go straight for Catherine, and not because he took her words as a rejection of any relationship. He was just tired. He realized he needed to clean himself up, and most importantly, he needed to think. Yeah, he's got a thing for this girl. He'd like her to be with him. Especially after he realized that she was free again and was having some difficulties again. But could he turn to her with confessions at a time like this? It wouldn't even be nice. It wouldn't even look right. It would look like he was trying to take advantage of her difficult situation. No, it was necessary to think over his behavior so as not to offend Catherine with his advances. By the next evening, he had come to his senses, and although there was no colloquial speech, could not prepare, and could not, decided to still visit Catherine, just to tell her the whole truth, to say everything as he thinks, and then let her decide what to do with him. To banish him forever, he himself did not know how else Catherine could do, and hoped only that she would not drive away. On the way, he bought a cake, fruit, some snacks, a bouquet of flowers, and went to get a solution to his plight. The door was opened by Jerry. Hello, Jerry. Don't recognize me? I'm here to see Catherine. Isn't she home yet? Holding back his excitement, David asked. No, replied the lad gloomily. She's been taken to the hospital. What? David was horrified. Why? Was she attacked? No one attacked. I don't know what it was myself. Just got sick. Called an ambulance myself. The doctors came. They asked me something, and they threw me out of the room. I couldn't hear. Then they took her away, but they said it was nothing. She'll be released soon. I'm going to see her tomorrow. David found out which hospital Catherine had been taken to, left the bags, and went looking for her. He imagined all sorts of horrors as he drove, what he was not ready to do to save his beloved. And the hospital was not allowed, reception hours were over, but he managed to get into the room allowed. Catherine, quite healthy at first glance, half lying on the bed, reading a book. David breathed a sigh of relief. Is everything all right? He rushed over to her. Catherine, hi, what's wrong? What do you need? Medication, doctor, surgery? I'll do anything for you. Thank you, Catherine replied calmly. Everything is free here. I'm fine. I just had a threatened miscarriage, so don't worry about me. One thing I will ask, please look after Jerry. He rang to say you were coming round. Yes, of course, we'll visit you together. As the threat passed. Are you in any pain? Nothing hurts. It just ached and went away. I'm fine now. Catherine's neighbor delicately left the room, giving them a chance to chat privately. Catherine added, Ah, it's Oliver's baby, in case you didn't realize. Got it, who cares? It's yours, after all. That's why I'm saying I'd do anything for you and your baby, for it to be born healthy and for you to be okay. Thank you, David, but you don't have to take care of me, much less other people's children. You did take care of me, a complete stranger, when I was in trouble. You care about Jerry and don't think about the fact that he has some other set of genes. And what makes you think I'm not capable of acting and feeling the same way? I didn't know how to tell you this, but now I'm going to say it. Catherine, I love you and I want you to be my wife. But even if you say no, I'll always be there for you as long as you need me. And please don't tell me you don't. I know better. I should be helping you right now. Catherine smiled and stroked his arm. Their relationship hadn't started immediately. David didn't cheat. He and Jerry came over every day, and during the time Catherine was in the hospital, they had become very close friends. The boy had long lacked the companionship of men, and he liked Uncle David. But when the man brought him to visit and said that he and Catherine would be much more comfortable living here, Jerry frowned. Better, I agree. But it's not my decision, or even yours, it's Catherine's. Do you want to marry her? Is she refusing? Yeah, and it's not like we haven't talked about it that seriously yet, David replied. And I certainly won't. If you want me to start talking her into it, I won't. That's for her to decide for herself, Jerry said in a very serious, mature way. Are you sure you're not related? David grinned. Catherine seems to be refusing for the same reasons. And I didn't mean anything bad by it, did I? I just love her. I just want her to be better. Catherine was discharged from the hospital and returned to her dormitory. It was difficult for her to agree to move in with David, but she had to, first of all, to keep the pregnancy. It would have been difficult in the hostel. The ultrasound showed she was expecting twins, and the pregnancy was complicated. How can you live in a dorm? There were cats, dogs, and people running through the corridors who didn't care that anyone was disturbed by the noise, smells, and tobacco smoke. Moving in was a lifesaver, and David had treated her and Jerry so well, it couldn't help but make an impression, and Oliver wasn't even on anyone's mind now. The man wasn't in their lives. It wasn't long before the day of the birth, and Catherine and Jerry were staying at the cottage. Catherine wanted so much to look at their children, press them to themselves, but to get rid of the heavy pregnancy was waiting for everyone, and David and Jerry protected the future mother as they could from all the worries. And so Kyle and Nicholas were born healthy, beautiful boys. David was as happy as a young father could be. In fact, he'd been by Catherine's side the entire pregnancy. He loved her. Catherine was ready to reciprocate his feelings. They had even talked about a wedding, which would manage as soon as the children were 6 months old. Catherine, looking at the babies, was pleased to find no resemblance in them to their biological father. There might have been, but she didn't want to see it. Catherine did not want to be reminded of the man who had abandoned her, even the smallest features. But soon Oliver reminded herself, his personal life failed again. The beautiful model had abandoned him, robbed him, and the man was alone again. And then inevitably in the memory came up Catherine, who loved him, not money and the benefits that can be obtained with their help. I thought she was pregnant. That is, she should already have a baby, which means that he has every chance to come to her with a guilty head, and she will be happy, he reasoned. But in the dormitory, he was shocked to hear that Catherine had gone to some man. How? I thought she was pregnant, he wondered. That's why she left. You see, it's inconvenient for her, the Barina, in the dormitory to live pregnant, noisy, stuffy, bad smell. And how do we all go around here pregnant, giving birth? Nothing, the scandalized young mother reprimanded. So she's rented a flat. Oliver didn't understand. With what money? Although someone got a hold of her and compromised. I don't know. She was walking around empty. Nobody wanted her. And here you are. I thought you quit too. And now you're coming back. Oliver just waved his hand. He wouldn't have to explain himself to that gossip columnist. Catherine would be like that if she stayed here. Where would he find her now? But news traveled fast, and soon he heard from mutual friends that David was getting married. and his future wife had given birth to twins. The biological father didn't delay. He bought a bouquet of flowers and 2 rattles. He'd heard they were the best gift for newborns, and headed out to visit the young family. "Hey, David, I hear mine's living with you now. She's got boys," he said from the doorstep to the owner who opened the door. "I came to congratulate you and take them away. I'm probably fed up with them." "Take who away? Where?" "Oliver, are you delirious? My wife had twins. You don't seem to have anything to do with this. And wait, what are you doing in the house? We got little kids here. I doubt my wife would want to see you." "So my kids. Thank you for taking them in, of course. But it's time for them to go home to their husband and father. We can keep Jerry as a consolation to you. Why should we have a stranger when we have our own? Where's Catherine? Why is she hiding?" Catherine had no intention of hiding. She heard a familiar voice and came out into the hall. "Oliver, have you come to congratulate us?" "Okay, friends, let's cut the act," the guest said firmly. "Let's not pretend we don't know what's the matter. You have children, Catherine, by me. It follows that they must live with me, the father. If you don't want to come with us, stay here. Go to the dormitory, wherever you want, but I'll take the twins. If you don't give them back yourself, I'll take them to court," he said. "You still have to prove whose they are," David said firmly. "No one will let you take infants away from their mother. And Catherine, as I understand it, isn't going anywhere with you. I can't imagine what court you're going to go to with your fictitious demands. That you will find out when you are summoned to that very court, and there explain why the children should be raised by me, the birth father." And Oliver walked resolutely out. "Do you think he can get us into trouble?" Catherine asked. "Oh, don't make it up. What trouble could there be?" David put his arm round her. "He seems determined. Like you know him better than I do. He's this way now and that way in 5 minutes. He has absolutely no use for those kids. He's just alone once again." So he remembered that he stupidly lost the best woman in the world. "I can still believe that he'll pop back into your life from time to time. And I'm kicking myself for making you recognize him, who stopped me from just meeting you at the shop and that was it." David was really remorseful about this. "Oh no, David, you mustn't say that. For otherwise he would have died such a horrible death. And besides, we wouldn't have Nicholas and Kyle. Well, I mean, we might have had them, but they were different, and I loved those guys. Oh, I'm sorry, honey. I must be saying the wrong thing. I blame myself for telling him I was pregnant. But what was the use of regretting the past when the present was wonderful? The children were growing up. David and Catherine's relationship was marvelous. They had already applied to the registry office and were preparing for the wedding. It was a little difficult for Catherine to cope with 2 babies, so the parents invited a nanny, Mrs. Bridget, an experienced woman. Nothing was heard for a while, but still he had not given up his intentions and was going to take the children away. But they were officially David's children, bearing his surname and middle name, and the biological father needed to provide proof that he had anything to do with the children at all. In today's world, it's not technically difficult to do. But practically, Catherine and David too would never allow DNA to be taken from children they considered only their own. Without their consent, he had no right. But Oliver had a way of getting his way. When he learned that there was a nanny, he tried to get to know her, to gain her trust, so that he could see the children occasionally. Mrs. Bridget, when she saw that someone was watching her when she was out with her charges, was at first alarmed. But Oliver had no intention of hiding. He approached her and spoke honestly about the reason for his interest. "You see, these children are mine, and David is actually infertile. Catherine used me to have them, and I didn't know. I thought she loved me. And when she left me, it was such a tragedy. I even left town for a while. But then I had to come back, and I found out that there were 2 babies born that I had nothing to do with, but they were my babies." His speech caused the woman to sympathize. After all, such a nice young man was really suffering a lot without his children, and it is inhuman to take children away from their father. "I agree with you, of course, Oliver. But you see, I work for these people, and I can't let you see the little ones against their will." You should try to go to court. I mean, the law is on the side of the biological parents. I'm sure you'll be favored. Yes, of course, I wouldn't want to let you down either. But you see, in order for the court to even begin to consider the case, I have to prove that the children are mine. And that requires a DNA test. Catherine, unfortunately, does not agree. And so, meeting with this kind woman, he tried time after time to make her sympathize, which gave him the opportunity to secretly take the children's samples from their parents. Once that was done, he could justifiably go to court. It was proven that Nicholas and Kyle were his own children. Oliver himself couldn't really say why he wanted to do all this. Yes, the children were his. He had no doubt about that. But it was hard to imagine him taking them home and raising them on his own, even with the help of a nanny. Especially since he was sure Catherine wouldn't go to anyway, and he didn't really want her to. He was sure that he would find a wife much more attractive in status. However, stubbornly continued his game, seeking to still possess the children, if only just to achieve his own. He was tired of being a loser among women. He wanted to finally become a winner. To do this, he spared no expense in bribing the judges, and as a result, he almost got what he wanted. Perhaps the children would not be given to him, but he would be able to see them whenever he wanted, to give them his patronymic and surname. And besides, this is a great way to take revenge on people who, as he thought, without any reason was more fortunate. Spoiling their lives, he managed quite well. At first, only Catherine and then David himself were seriously worried. It was especially hard for Catherine. Even the very thought that her children could be taken away from her was unbearable to her. And even the fact that the kids are likely not taken away, but simply recognize the paternity of Oliver, ordered to change the names and oblige her to take the biological father at home at any time, also broke the usual way of life. Now even Catherine sometimes couldn't stand it and tearfully said, "Why did I save him? If I had known it would turn out like this." And Jerry was troubled. He did not want to see Oliver at home at all, for he was set against him. Meanwhile, by his illegal stories and bribes, Oliver had almost got his way. But on the eve of the decisive court hearing, where the fate of both children and adults was to be decided, tragedy struck. He failed to control his car on a slippery road and had an accident. He was not killed, but suffered very serious injuries. Learning about this, Catherine at first sighed with relief. But when she learned how serious the situation of her former lover, she realized you cannot rejoice in someone else's grief. After all, the doctor said that Oliver most likely will never get back on his feet. And that was truly awful. Catherine realized what he was in, a completely alone, helpless invalid. She visited him in the hospital, and there she learned that Oliver had realized a lot. "You are sorry, Catherine, I behaved terribly towards you. But as you see, I've been punished, haven't I? Now I'm in almost the same position you pulled me out of. A bedridden invalid, unable to move. I was never much of a believer, but now I can't help thinking that it is I who am being punished by heaven for all the trouble I have brought upon you." "Oh, come now, Oliver," Catherine sighed. "Firstly, you brought me not only misfortune, but also great happiness, my babies. And secondly, your diagnosis isn't a judgment yet. The doctor said it's still quite possible to regain mobility. Not right away, of course. And you're going to have a lot of surgery and a lot of rehab. And also, I thought it wouldn't be a bad thing if you saw the kids once when the kids. Of course, David will be daddy to them, but you won't be a stranger to them either. And maybe after a while we can tell them who their father really is."